Welcome to the Hammer Theater Center. Before we begin, please take a moment to turn off any noise-making electronic devices. Also, please take this time to find your nearest emergency exit. Lastly, we would like to remind you that the taking of photography or recording of any kind is prohibited. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to see so many folks here. Welcome to the second Words to Action Town Hall event of the SJSU Institute for the Study of Sport Society and Social Change. I'm Ted Butrin, the interim founding director of the Institute and a professor in the Department of Kinesiology, going on 18 years. Today, midway through Women's History Month, we will be discussing perhaps the most pressing combination of issues at the intersection of sport and society today, including gender equity, sexual abuse, and violence against women within and outside of sport. First, I'd like to take just a minute to share a bit about the Institute. The Institute was created as a space within which to conduct research, present timely, cutting-edge programming such as today, and engage in outreach on issues related to sport and society that we see not only on ESPN, on sport programming, but on the nightly news as well. Two of the central components of our work involve research in the areas that are core to San Jose State as an institution. On one hand, much of our initial research line with SJSU faculty and our affiliate faculty at other institutions nationally and internationally hinges on the legacy of San Jose State, athlete activism, and the struggles ongoing for social justice. The other trajectory of our work leverages SJSU's important role in powering the Silicon Valley, itself a center of technology and innovation, in an effort to understand the complex relationships between technology and sport, the body, and various lines of social identity: race, class, gender, sexual orientation, age, ability, disability, and so on. In addition, perhaps the most important part of our work will be to involve our almost 35,000 undergraduate and graduate students in research and other activities on campus. To this aim, we are currently planning a student research fair to be held in coordination with the 50th anniversary of the 1968 Olympic protests and the Olympic Project for Human Rights this coming November. We're really excited to see the projects that our undergraduate and graduate students from across many departments across campus present this fall. And finally, as we move forward to our programming, I sincerely believe that all of us will leave this event with a new vocabulary, if not a new language, and a heightened understanding of these issues our panelists and speakers are discussing today. In addition, I hope that we center these issues in our daily conversations with friends and family, significant others, coaches, teammates, administrators, and those higher up the food chain, including politicians. And with that, thank you again for coming today, and please join the conversation via social media using the hashtag #SJSUWordsToAction. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the president of San Jose State University, Dr. Mary Papazian.
Thank you, Ted, and good morning. What an honor to welcome all of you to Words to Action, Gender, Sport, and Society, the second town hall of the Institute for the Study of Sport, Society, and Social Change here at San Jose State University. I am thrilled that we are holding this day of significant and invigorating programming right here in the Hammer Theater, in the heart of San Jose, during Women's History Month, and 46 years following the 1972 passage of the Title IX legislation requiring equity for women and girls in education, including athletics. 46 years. The amazing thing, it's 46 years and we still have to have the conversation. Together, our city and our university have shown time and time again a willingness to ask the thought-provoking questions and to address the big challenges that issues like gender equity and women's rights in sports present. And I thank each of you for your enthusiastic support of our institute and for your ready commitment to engage on these critical issues with us this morning. I am especially pleased that so many San Jose State alumni and children of alumni are here today, including among our distinguished speakers. Now, just a few months ago, and about 1 mile away from here, the U.S. women's hockey team faced off against the Canadian women's team at the arena we like to call the Shark Tank. This December game at the SAP Center was formed as part of the U.S. Olympic team trials for women's hockey. The Americans and the Canadians made up the two best women's hockey teams in the world, and their ongoing duel for the #1 spot reaches back more than 20 years to the 1998 Olympics in Nagano, Japan. Unfortunately, in the game in San Jose this past December, the U.S. team lost to the Canadian team 3-1. But a mere 2 months later, the teams had played their way into a major rematch. And there's no suspense here, you know the outcome. The gold medal game of the 2018 Olympics in Pyeongchang. This time, and for the first time at an Olympic championship game since Nagano, it was the team from the United States that defeated the team from Canada for gold. The American women won 3-2 in a thrilling tie-breaking shootout. This victory marked an extraordinary moment for our country and for all who love the sport of hockey. Yet some might argue that this achievement was not the most thrilling moment for American women's hockey in the last year. Some might argue, in fact, that the most thrilling moment occurred last March when the U.S. women's hockey team reached an historic agreement with USA Hockey on equal pay and support. The negotiations for this agreement focused on salary equity with male national team players, equivalent insurance policies, travel funding, and lodging to what male national team players received, and equity in investment and development opportunities for future American women hockey players. In reference to that historic agreement and to all that followed for American women's hockey in the subsequent months, hockey player Megan Dugan, who serves as captain of the U.S. team, remarked that this is a moment for women in other sports and women in business and in every single walk of life. We need to show our power and what women can do so we can work toward more equality. When I hear those words, I recall the words of so many other athletes who have deployed their talents not only on the rink, on the court, on the track, or on the field, but also on behalf of humanity. I recall the words of Olympian athletes like Tommie Smith, one of San Jose State's very own, who said this: "If I didn't use the influence I'd gained from being a world-class athlete, I wouldn't be doing my part in society." These words exemplify what we at San Jose State, and in particular at the Institute, mean when we say words to action. Sports have long served as a metaphor for life, occasionally to a hackneyed, even cliched degree. But the lessons of this metaphor take on real meaning in the arenas of industry and business, especially here in the heart of the Silicon Valley, of schools and universities, and of national sports organizations. Putting these lessons into practice, transforming words to action, sparks the activism necessary to change those arenas for the better for everyone who enters them. In the larger context of the Me Too movement sweeping our country, the timing for this conversation has never been more important. It is no coincidence, for example, that Megan Dugan not only captained the team that won the Olympic championship, she also captained the effort to reach the agreement with USA Hockey. That effort included educating other women hockey players about why they should support the national team's work to achieve equality for all, outreach that proved critical when U.S. Hockey tried and failed to find enough replacement players to take the spots of the national team members who had threatened to boycott international competition. There is no denying that the gold medal the U.S. women's hockey team won is a meaningful and significant capstone to years of hard work on the ice. But the enduring victory is not an Olympic championship. The enduring victory is a guaranteed salary of $70,000 a year, every year, and not just $6,000 for only a few months, and only in the Olympic years. The enduring victory is a guaranteed policies for maternity leave and childcare, so that women athletes can afford to compete and have a family without having to work multiple jobs. The enduring victory is guaranteed investment in the next generation of women's athletes, so that girls who want to play at the highest level have competitive teams on which to do so, and the good coaches and organizational support necessary to ensure they fulfill their full potential. It is in the spirit of these enduring victories that we are all here today. For the next few hours, we will talk about what we can do together as athletes, as scholars, and as advocates to turn words to action on behalf of women in sports. You will hear from women who represent the full scope of women's leadership in the athletic arena, from the trailblazers of the early Title IX days, including Ann Myers Drysdale, who was the first woman to receive a 4-year college athletic scholarship from UCLA, and who was starring on the women's basketball team during my years as a Bruin, to the trailblazers of our current era, when the phrase women in sports signifies not just athletes, but also sports reporters and media executives, legal counsel, and coaches. You will hear from women who stand at the vanguard of the Me Too movement, like Brenda Tracy, and you will hear from women who are Hall of Famers, athletes who have been honored with every kind and type of award, and celebrated Olympians, including our keynote speaker, Nancy Hogshead-Maker. As president of San Jose State, I am so proud that our university has taken the lead on having the right conversations and taking the right actions to expand equity of opportunity for all who wish to pursue a life of sport and beyond. Thank you all for joining us today. And now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the stage a scholar who has been a champion for equal rights for all women and men of all backgrounds for more than 50 years, dating back to his time as a student and later as a professor right here at San Jose State University, where he and others launched the Olympic Project for Human Rights. Please join me in welcoming our partner in creating the Institute for the Study of Sport, Society, and Social Change, Dr. Harry Edwards.
Thank you, Madam President. It's a pleasure to be here again. I deeply appreciate it. I've only been given about 18 minutes to talk, but then I'm humbled at that. Abraham Lincoln only had 2.5 minutes, and he gave the greatest speech in history. The guy before him spoke for 4 hours, and we don't even remember his name. So I feel privileged to be here. My topic today is Women in Sports, Vanguard in the Struggle for Gender Equity and Justice. Considering how deeply rooted, pervasive, and persistent the array of structural, cultural, and ideological obstacles and challenges are to women and girls in sports, their evolution of full, equal, and respected athletes, and so forth, what they have achieved, what it symbolizes and manifests, the real wonder and measure of their strength, determination, and consummate athletic prowess is not that they have so far to go, but that they have come as far as they have. When Pierre de Coubertin reinstated the Olympic Games in 1896, women were categorically forbidden to participate. To quote de Coubertin, A woman's glory rightfully comes through the number and quality of children she produces, and that as far as sports are concerned, her greatest accomplishment is to encourage her sons to excel. Women's participation in the games would be dangerous to their reproductive abilities, impractical, unaesthetic, uninteresting, incorrect, and unfeminine. Olympic participation would destroy women's feminine charm, meaning, of course, their appeal to men as sex objects. It was not until the second Olympiad in 1900 that de Coubertin and other Olympic Games officials and advocates relented in the face of expanding feminist movements across Europe and allowed women to participate. A total of 4 women competed in those games, in golf and tennis, and including one woman who participated in mixed sailing. De Coubertin's assessment at the time was succinct and determinately negative and anti-female. Nobody is interested in watching women play sports, unquote. By 1922, women had begun a long and arduous slog toward greater participation that would not be complete until the onset of the second decade of the 21st century, when women's boxing was included in the 2012 London Olympic Games. Even where institutionalized structural barriers and impediments prohibiting and limiting women's access and participation in sports have been overcome, however, the values and ideological sentiments framing and coloring perceptions of their participation have tended to survive and persist, adapting throughout the generations, shoring up system biases to frustrate and obstruct women's progress toward full, equal, and respected status, both in sports and society. These ideological adaptations and persisting institutional and cultural inclinations, along with conscious strategic efforts in some cases, such as in the case of de Coubertin, the founder of the Olympics, are directly associated with dispositions, personal, institutional, and ideological, in society more general, no less than in sports, to keep women in their place, in their lane, subordinate, subservient, obedient, powerless, and controlled. This general perspective toward women, so characteristic of Western civilization in general, has reached its full expression in the saga of women's struggles to participate in sport in American society. Let me state unequivocally at the outset that we cannot disentangle women's struggles in sport from the double-edged evil of America's original sins, white supremacy and patriarchy. From the very outset as a nation, America has forged interlinked chains of white supremacy and patriarchy in order to secure control over peoples of color and women. Black males in particular have been murdered and lynched, suppressed and oppressed as threats to white womanhood, while white women have been consigned to the 24/7 protective custody of white men who have control over them intellectually, ideologically, and personally, principally to keep them, quote, safe from the black beast, unquote. Both white women and black men historically have existed constantly under the watch of those who control the institutions, power, and ideological definitions of society, lest white male authority, institutional, ideological, and otherwise, be threatened. Part of the mechanism of controlling white women, in particular, and keeping all women accessible and dependent has been to control definitions and options relative to their dominion over their own bodies. From the founding of this nation, women and girls, like enslaved Africans, were seen as the property of the white men who lorded over them and controlled them. And this went far beyond the ascription of these white males' last names to their slave property and to the women they married. If you were black and you owned Jones's plantation, as a slave, your last name became Jones. If you were a woman and you married Jones, your last name became Jones. Those were insignia of ownership. Women have historically been subjected to all but total institutional and cultural control in every realm of public and private life and space in America, usually rationalized as being for their own good, for their own protection. In 1885, over a century after the establishment of the United States Constitution Bill of Rights and nearly 2 decades after passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments prohibiting slavery, not only could women not vote, buy, or sell property in most states, but the age of consent to enter sexual liaisons and marriage with girls was 10 years old in 36 states and 7 years old in Delaware. And of course, the age of consent was not their consent, but the consent of the men who controlled them, their bodies, and their lives. This lack of dominion over their person has lurked in the shadows of American culture in less stark and startling forms and expression to this day. Though as a nation, such travesties as child marriage have come to be frowned upon culturally and in most states illegal. Still, well into the 1980s, rape in marriage was not established as a crime in most states. And into the 1960s, a man could beat his wife without fear of legal repercussions. In point of fact, well into the 1960s, it was likely that a person would get more time and greater fines for beating a dog in the streets than for beating a woman in his home. Even at the present, most counties across America have more shelters for abused animals than for abused women and girls. And while we decry 242 concussions in the NFL over the 2017 season in football, it is estimated by the CDC that 4.8 million women were subjected to domestic violence last year, potentially adding to the estimated 20 million women and girls already suffering traumatic brain injury in the United States from being beaten, slapped, stomped, punched, kicked, snatched, shaken, slammed against the floor or the wall, bludgeoned with objects ranging from baseball bats, skillets, pokers, pots, pans, and more. And little of this comes to the attention of the public or of society in terms of newsworthy stories. In fact, it is not even subjected to medical or scientific study and analysis. In looking up the focus of topics of scientific and medical interest as far as published paper titles are concerned on traumatic brain injury, one researcher reports that there were 2,653 titles relating to sports injuries having to do with traumatic brain injury. 1,624 titles related to military injuries, and a combined total of 253 titles only focused on domestic violence and the domestic abuse causes of traumatic brain injury in the United States. Most of those 253 titles having to do with traumatic brain injuries suffered by women and girls. Other statistics tend to compound the tragedy of malignant neglect of women related to violence and the control of them at the hands of men. The number of American troops, for example, killed in the first 10 years of the Afghanistan war was 6,614. The number of women killed as a result of domestic violence disputes over that same period of time was 11,766, almost twice as many. The military deaths were subject to persistent news reports, the latter not significantly reported at all. In 2011, 943 women were reported the victims of honor killings in Pakistan. This made a number of headline lead stories in cable TV and in the printed news media. That same year, over 1,000 women were killed by their spouses in the United States, and you could not get a razor blade between the reasons that those killings took place, according to some court documents. She didn't respect me. She went when I told her to stay. I wanted her to do this, and she did that. Honor-type killings only, we just don't call them that. And while the U.S. has the worst maternal death rate during childbirth in the developed world, the number one and number two causes of death of women during pregnancy in the United States is domestic homicide, and second, suicide, typically in the wake of domestic abuse and violence. Unless I leave the wrong impression, let it be noted that the number one cause of death for African American women ages 15 through 34 is homicide at the hands of intimate partners. They are only 13% of the women in this country, but they suffer half of the homicides committed against women. We decry 147 African Americans killed every year by police since 1968. But there are 3 women killed every day by their spouses and significant others, well over 1,000 each year, and half of those are African American women killed mostly by African American men. In fact, across all racial and ethnic affiliations, a kind of toxic masculinity prevails culturally that engenders some men toward tendencies of violence and homicide against women. And the homicides and suicides related to this toxic masculinity are but the most grievous outcomes of the problems that we are confronted with today in this regard. Even though an estimated 30% of rapes are reported, in 2015, a Department of Justice report indicated that there were well over 400,000 untested rape kits sitting in evidence rooms across the United States. As of November 17, 2017, apparently little had changed. The estimated total of untested rape kits, in fact, may have increased due to cases filed in the intervening 2 years, despite efforts by states such as California to reduce the rape kit backlog. And because these cumulative facts of murder, suicide, and rape are not kept before the public as the massive constellation of public health issues and challenges that they constitute, they evolve and persist largely in the shadows of American culture and society. Unspoken about, oftentimes unrecognized, and most certainly unreported at the level that they should be. And to what end? Women are acutely aware individually of what is happening to them. This is the basis of the Me Too movement. That movement creates a collective identity and voice, a public forum for women to speak collectively about what society will not shine a light on, much less admit to and address. Me Too began with the most common form of offense against women, sexual harassment and physical sexual assault, but ultimately it must and will encompass other violence against women, such as battery and physical assault, right up to and including murder. This must come to include the whole spectrum of assaults against women, because the goal of all of it is to keep women in their lane, to keep women and girls in their place. Now, where do women in sports come into all of this? Unlike the movies, where a woman's role is choreographed, where usually men directors and writers and producers who dominate those industries project images of women as love objects, as sex objects, as conspiring and contriving negative personalities and so forth, weak to be rescued, somehow to be supported, controlled. A major thrust of the culture of toxic male domination over women in society more general is to make women appear and feel weak and inadequate, in contrast to powerful, masculine males. All of that stuff that they put together is toward the end of making women feel inferior, feel inadequate, feel that they should be controlled, they have to be protected, and so forth. The violence and sexual assault, the body shaming, etc., against women and girls is all done in the service of those ends, whether consciously by men or through a lifetime of acculturation and habit. And when social convention, institutional behavior, and ideological characterizations are not enough to keep women in line, to keep women in their lanes, to keep them in their place, then you find in far too many instances this resort to coercion and brute violence. Now, we know that women are not weak, that they are not inadequate, that they are, we know that they are strong, we know that they are resilient and persistent. They have had to be, despite the petite, fragile, mentally vacuous, infinitely vulnerable roles they are so often required to play, and that they are cast in popular culture. Whether as child bearers under the most difficult of circumstances, as sharecroppers over the generations in places like the Deep South, as farm wives, as urban heads of urban households, as factory workers, and so forth, women historically have proven their physical, mental, competitive, and spiritual mettle. That is undeniable. From the founding of this nation in 1776 through World War II, there were few labor-saving devices available to women. Their domestic labor work rivaled that of bricklayers, ditch diggers, construction workers, people who were doing the heaviest and most taxing physical work as they went about their business of lifting children, washing and wringing clothes, carrying all kinds of heavy items in order to keep the household together and to make it work. And as long as this heavy work was relegated to their domestic duties, it was not seen to impugn their womanhood, their femininity, because they were still in their place. They were still in their lane, meeting men's expectations and directives. During wartime, there was not even any hesitancy to produce and promote images of Rosie the Riveter, because again, this was a role that men had said, we need women in this role. So Rosie the Riveter, who was projected as muscular, who was projected as physical, who was projected as powerful, was actually promoted, put in pictures, put up on billboards. But when these women became involved in sports, their physical prowess was so often demeaned, they were shamed, and to the greatest extent possible, they were ignored. More than any other message, women's achievement in sport, because of the way that sports participation and involvement has been cast, communicates that I am here. I will not be robbed of my positive self-image. I will not be robbed of my dignity. I will not be robbed of my self-confidence at any age. I will not be robbed of my voice. I will not be body shamed to the point that I despair over the body that God and my parents have blessed me with. I am strong. I am going to be here. I'm going to be involved. To paraphrase the words of the illustrious Miss Angela Davis, I will not be compliant and complicit with what I have been taught. I cannot change. I am committed to changing that which I cannot and will not accept. I demand right now, today, here in this country, to be respected, to be valued, to be treated as a full, equal, and contributing human being, to have full and equal justice, because enough is enough. It is time. Because women's lives matter. And we wonder why women's sports are downplayed, why they do not get coverage. The message is that powerful. They use women to sell everything in American society. They use women to sell cars, to sell clothes, to sell vacations, to sell cruises, to sell cleaning supplies, to sell hamburgers. But they can't sell women's sports? Somebody is kidding me. They have managed to promote and sell the Puppy Bowl against the toughest competing TV audience in history on Super Bowl Sunday. But they can't figure out a way to package, promote, and sell women's sports. Give me a break. Today, we have two great panels. I hope that you will listen and take heart in their stories, understand their specific messages, and the deeper, perhaps less obvious and apparent messages endemic to both their presentations and the ongoing struggle of women in sports, especially the message that this has to do with demonstrating unequivocally who women are and what they're capable of. It is indicative of the fact that the struggle continues because women and girls' lives matter. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our moderator for Panel 1, author and Marshall University history professor, Cat Williams.
Thank you, and welcome to this great event. You know, we at the International Women's Baseball Center are dedicated to preserving the long history and the lasting legacy of girls and women in sport, especially baseball. But preserving that history is not just about saving old photographs or displaying a bunch of uniforms or trophies. Women's sporting history is not simply a set of artifacts to be viewed through glass or a collection of manuscripts tucked away in acid-free folders. Our history is alive, exciting, and relevant, and for the sake of us all, we must use its vibrance. Our history must be used to encourage the dreams of young girls, the intellectual ones and the physical ones. It should be used to assure them that when they step up and ask, "What about me?" that they are speaking with the strength of a million voices. It must be used to show girls who want to play that they are not alone, and that the shoulders on which they stand are strong and true and courageous. They need to know that our history is their history, that the foundation on which they stand is made up of some names that we all know, but millions more that we don't. To a woman, those pioneers lift us up. They light our way to the pool, to the court, to the field, and because of their strength, we all have the gift of hope. And it is my honor today to welcome to the stage 4 of those trailblazers. Well, I have the great honor of sitting up here with these 4 women. Are you jealous? Because you should be. I'm going to start by introducing each of these folks, and then we've got a few questions that will hopefully start the conversation. To my immediate right is Ann Myers Drysdale, who was one of the first women to be inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. She is currently the vice president of the Phoenix Suns of the NBA and the Phoenix Mercury of the WNBA. She has been called, in fact by many, one of the greatest stars in the history of basketball. In fact, Time magazine recently called her one of the 10 greatest female athletes of all time. A female first in many categories, she is still the only woman to ever sign a free agent contract with an NBA team, the Indiana Pacers, back in 1979. Stacy Johnson is the president of Valencia College's East and Winter Park campuses. She earned her doctorate in educational administration from the University of Texas at Austin. Johnson is perhaps best known as a champion fencer, a 2-time national college champion in fencing, and served as a member of the United States 1980 Olympic fencing team. She has continued her service to the Olympics by serving on the U.S. Olympic Committee's Board of Directors from 1996 to 2004, and was elected to the USOC Executive Committee for 2003 to 2004. Johnson also served as president of the U.S. Fencing Association from 2000 to 2004, and was the first woman in the organization's 125-year history to serve 4 terms as president. Ann Warner Cribbs began her swimming career when she was 5, and at the tender age of 14, she swam in the 1959 Pan American Games. A year later, she competed at the 1960 Rome Olympic Games. She's the holder of the American records in both the 100 and 200-meter breaststroke events. She placed 5th in the 200-meter breaststroke at the Rome Olympics and was a member of the gold medal-winning 400-meter medley relay team. Ann retired from competitive swimming at the age of 16. Her professional career has been dedicated to serving sport and the community. In 1995, Ann co-founded the American Basketball League, the first women's professional basketball league in the United States. Marie Tuitt is the director. You can cheer for your own.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
She is the director of intercollegiate athletics at San Jose State University. She is one of only 9 women who serve as athletic director at an NCAA Division I Football Bowl Subdivision FBS institution. She originally joined San Jose State in June of 2010 as a senior associate athletics director and the athletics department's chief operating officer. She held the position of deputy director of athletics, internal operations, and fulfilled the role of senior woman administrator before being named athletics director. Now, that is quite a group of trailblazers. I'd like to start with a question for all of you, and if you would like to just share your story, and then hopefully we'll have a nice conversation with the 4 of you. First of all, even though it's 2018, female athletes are still fighting for recognition. And recognition in all kinds of ways, whether we're talking about major media and as we heard a little while ago, getting access to women's sports on places like ESPN and et cetera. So women are still fighting for that recognition. What was that fight like for you?
Well, for me, I come from a family of 11 children. I have 5 brothers and 5 sisters, and the oldest is my oldest sister, Patty. And so growing up in the 50s and 60s, I had a wonderful role model. And so when people say, well, we didn't have an opportunity to play, and I look at my sister, who was 8 years older than I was, she was already breaking ground, and with women that were competing at that time, too. So I had a great role model in her, and also I was... growing up, you only had 2 sports for young girls that really you could compete in: swimming, which I would sink, and the other was track and field. So I loved track and field. My dad had played basketball at Marquette, and so we grew up with basketball around our family, and sports was a great outlet for all of us. And certainly track and field, I had seen the Olympics, and that was the first time I had seen something where women were competing, and also in 4th grade read a book on Babe Didrikson Zaharias. And that opened my eyes also to have that dream of being an Olympian. And I thought I would do it in track and field, but as Harry was talking about the different eras with women being introduced to the Olympics, 1976 was the very first year they had women's basketball in the Olympics. And so my goal and dream was fulfilled, where we won the silver medal in 1976, the first time they had women's basketball in the Olympics. And so I've just kind of been in the right place at the right time, came along when Title IX came along in 1972. In 1974, Billie Jean King playing Bobby Riggs. 1975, I was the first woman to get a full athletic scholarship at UCLA. And my brother David was there under Coach Wooden, won a couple of national championships. And, just things kind of kept happening. In 1978, I was the #1 draft pick in the WBL, which was the very first women's professional league in this country. And I chose not to go because 1980 I wanted to go to the Olympics, and you had to be an amateur at that time. But during that time, I had received an offer to try out for the Indiana Pacers. My brother David was already playing in the NBA, and I thought it was an opportunity of a lifetime. And I didn't want to look back in my life and say, what if? And so I made that choice and to try out with the Pacers and bypass the Olympics, which Jimmy Carter boycotted. And then the next year I would go into the WBL and play there. But then played Superstars and broadcasting, and just things kind of fell into place for me.
Excellent. Would you like to?
Well, I started fencing when I was about 11 or 12 years old. I was living in San Antonio, Texas, and it just so happened that the headquarters for modern pentathlon as a sport, Olympic sport, was there, and women were not allowed to compete in modern pentathlon at that time, but the French fencing master was kind of giving lessons on the side, and so that's how I started to fence, and then I made my first junior world team at 16 and met my future coach, which was Michael DeSaro, who was intent upon coming to San Jose State. And that's how I got to San Jose State. At the time I was fencing, I have to tell you, for example, just my high school experience, that when it would rain the guys got the gym, and the girls went downstairs and played jacks.
Of course.
And,
Right. Of course.
and also, always at the competitions, we got kind of the second level. The men always got the preferred facilities, and we got the second level. And also, when I started fencing, there are 3 different disciplines in the sport of fencing: foil, épée, and saber. And foil was the only discipline that they allowed women to fence. As I came to really know and understand the game, I really realized that I really was a saber fencer if I would have had that ability to compete in that. And so later, I made the 1980 Olympic team and at San Jose State, and we had an incredible team of people, and there's a number of the fencers that are here today in the audience. It was a very special time, and I'm so beholden to the university. My freshman year, I took a feminist course that changed my life. And
They tend to do that.
Yeah, you bet. And so when I had the opportunity, I had some wonderful male allies. Steve Sobel, who was president twice for USA Fencing and also was both secretary and vice president for the U.S. Olympic Committee, was a mentor of mine and gave me the notion that I might be able to run for president. And so I had served a stint on the Athletes Advisory Council and had been a vice president for my sport. And so in 1996, épée was allowed in Atlanta, and my quadrennial was 2000 to 2004, and I became very intent that we were going to get saber in. And so I worked very hard with a number of my colleagues and allies, and the first thing that we did is we had a strategy to put an American on every single international commission. So we had kind of infiltration. And then we made common cause with the Pan-American countries who were being discriminated against in a lot of ways. Also with the African nations, and then of course Norway and Sweden and those places that were more natural allies. And there was about 120 countries, and we won by a margin of 7 votes. Women came into the Athens Olympics, and I'm very happy to say that American women took gold and bronze. And this will be my last comment, but it's often said there's a myth that if women do well, then the men don't do well, or it's some loss to them. And I can tell you that the success of the women's saber team catapulted men's weapons forward and unlocked kind of the psychology for America in general that we could win at the highest levels, and happened since that time.
Very good. Thank you. Well, I'd like to say that I read the book, too, about Annie, about Babe Dietrichson, and was so impressed and thought that would be a really cool thing to do, but it certainly wasn't in track for me. I'm a California kid. I was born here in Burlingame and did my Learn to Swim at Sequoia High School. My coach happened to be, or my teacher happened to be Jim Gorin, who might be a name familiar to some of you, who had just gone to the Helsinki Olympics. And so I kind of learned from him about the Olympic Games. And so when I was 8, I swam my first race at Burgess Park in Menlo Park at the pool. I did an 18.2. I got out of the water with my little chin strap on my hat and my bathing suit with a little skirt on it. And I said, I actually won the race, and I said, I'm going to go to the Olympic Games. And so my mother, I was an only child, so my mother wanted to have me do what I wanted to do, which was great. And I started swimming with George Haynes, the great George Haynes, who produced so many Olympians at Santa Clara. I never knew another coach. We had a great team. As I look back, thinking we were treated equally, boys and girls on the team, had equal opportunities in terms of meets and all of that kind of thing. And I got involved in competition at a national level, broke some American records, went to the Pan American Games, and was on track to go to the Olympics in 1960. And when we finished at the Olympic Games, the men's team went to Europe on a tour.
And the girls' team, which is what we were called, had to come home because we didn't have a chaperone. We weren't allowed to go without a chaperone. So we came home and we retired. The two world record holders on the team who swam at Santa Clara with me, Chris Von Salsa and Lynn Burke. Chris went to Stanford on an academic scholarship. Lynn Burke became a cheerleader for St. John's for the men's basketball team. And the most important thing about that, not her being a cheerleader, but is that we never imagined that we could swim in college. We never saw the opportunity. It wasn't there. There were no scholarships, and there was no Title IX. So obviously, I'm a pre-Title IX baby. And when people say, well, you know, how do you feel about that? Well, I'm so happy that we have Title IX now, but I'm also so annoyed that I didn't get to see how fast I could have done, you know, at 22 or 23 with all the great training facilities and what we've learned about nutrition and about swimming and all of that. So every time I watch the Olympic Games on television, I'm like, ooh, I wish I could be there. So fast forward just a bit, you talked about the ABL to 1995. I was going to be 50 in 1996, and so I decided that I would run a marathon. My marathon became the ABL. And two of my colleagues and I, three co-founders of the ABL, all from Silicon Valley, Gary Cavalli and Steve Hams and me, decided that we needed to have a professional women's basketball league where women could play basketball, an American game, not have to go overseas after they finished in college, and enjoy the game, and we could play in basketball season. Ruthie, I'm not sure where you are out there, but Ruthie was one of our players. It was the most incredible experience for 2.5 years because we were able to shape the league the way we thought it should be. We were able to provide a lot of education for women athletes at the very beginning. We feel very proud of what we did. Unfortunately, we ran into David Stern, and he loved to control basketball, and so we went out of business after our third year, but I think that what we started remains, and there's a lot of great sentiment about the ABL. I'm glad to see the WNBA still in business after 20 years. I would love to see it go on, and what's going to be most important, I think, is for women to support women athletes and buy seats in the arenas and really show up.
Yes,
so.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I think it was about 18 months ago when Dr. Edwards mentioned to me his vision for today, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank President Papazian and Dr. Lanning and Dr. Butrin, and in particular, Dr. Edwards. I mean, I'm proud to be a Spartan every day, but I'm especially proud today for the Institute and what we're doing here today. So, and you will not find a man more supportive of women and women in sport than Dr. Edwards. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank him for that. Yes. So I am what you would call a pre-Title IX athlete. I didn't have an opportunity to compete when I was in middle school, and actually only my last year of high school, but I had 4 brothers, and I competed in basketball in college. And just for the record, I've asked both Ann and Ruthie to play me one-on-one, and they both have declined. They are afraid, and they should be. I told them nickname's Lightning, you know, that first step, and I'm gone. Look at Ruthie back there. She's ready. Last night she was ready to take it on. Let's go. She goes, let's go. And I was like, oh, my hamstring's been sort of bothering me. But there's never been a better day than today to be a female athlete. Someone asked me a few weeks ago, you know, and I thought it was kind of a silly question, you know, is Title IX working? And, you know, did Title IX work? And I thought, oh my gosh, just take a look at the Olympics and how the United States, in just about every discipline in sport, has just dominated the world. So for girls and women today, they're having not just good experience, a number of women in particular at San Jose State are having terrific experiences, and there's still so much work to do. And as far as some of the things you were mentioning about the media exposure and being able to be more self-supporting and all those issues where we sort of compare ourselves to men. And it's tough, it's tough. I would hope that as we look to the future that the more conversations we have like today, the more attention it gives to women. I think we have to be very careful of comparing men to women. That happens in basketball often, where maybe perhaps someone enjoys watching men's basketball more than women's basketball because they compare the games and they're very, very different. But I'm excited for the future of women in sport, but we have a lot of work to do.
Yes, we do. We do. And you're correct that conversations like this are just invaluable. As we can tell from your stories, we have a very rich history in women's sports. And as I said in my opening remarks, it's important to use that history. It's important to use it to make sure people understand that girls today understand that they have some shoulders to stand on. And one way we do that is by you continuing to tell your stories, for you to continue to encourage those girls. And we've all talked about pre-Title IX a little bit. All of us are sort of pre-Title IX athletes. And to your point, we were all, I mean, when you think back now about the athletes that we were, just think how marvelous we would have been had it been. I'm a much better athlete in my head when I think about now. If I'd only played after Title IX, but in all seriousness, Title IX will make young women better athletes, but it will also make them better business people and better teachers and better people. And so, what I'd like to do is ask a question along those lines. How did your athletic career prepare you to take the roles that you have today, both in athletics and outside athletics? Anyone who would like to start? It's fine. Ann, would you like to start?
Well, first of all, Title IX, I just want to say, is not a women's sports law. And it was basically placed back in 1972 as an education law for women educators to get paid equal pay, which that's not happening today. And so it's become kind of the mantra for women in sports. And certainly the bottom line is the opportunity. It's given young girls and women the opportunity to do something that they love, and especially in sports. In sports, you hope that whether it be on the boys' side or the girls' side, that it's not only good mentally but physically, and just leadership skills, character, discipline, determination, all these things that happen in sports, how to lose, how to win, is part of life. And certainly we found since Title IX that women in business, more women that are in a CEO position, have usually played sports. And there's no question that sports has been a positive for young girls. And even we see now, too, with a lot of attitudes changing, that fathers are having daughters. And so they're more involved with their daughters competing. They're more involved with their wives running marathons. They're more involved with their sisters, or it just, there's that connection with men and women, with their daughters, their wives, their sisters, and so forth. And I think that that's really important, just to have that connection and that attitude change of men accepting that young girls and women are competing in sports.
And I would like to make sure, too, that there's an understanding for me is that in '76, I was one of 200 women in the state of California that got some of the first Title IX scholarships here at San Jose State.
Very nice.
And the first year that we won the national championships, who came to the sports banquet but Dr. Gail Fullerton? And little did I know how important that was for me to have seen her, because you know what? It gave me the idea that later in my life, I might be able to be a college president, because I saw that, and she was really a forerunner. Right. And I just also want to thank the university and the president and Paul Lanning and his team, and Dr. Edwards for the work that goes on here about access and equity for this community, for the region, for the nation, and for the world. And so I really appreciate that. And certainly I think, I'll tell you something else. I served with two other women who are campus presidents, and guess what? They are both athletes. One was a volleyball player in college, and the other one is a fantastic golfer. But this idea of knowing your center, of playing within, of playing within team, of getting knocked down and getting back up again, because that is forever and about solving problems and solving problems together in teams.
Right.
Those are all of those things. And women need that as surely as men do in this society. And the other thing is we need all people, all voices, all matter. And so I think that is what sports promotes.
Yes.
Boy, that was very well said.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
very
no
good.
reason for the
Very
rest of
good.
us to speak, right?
And you know, I would just echo, sports teaches us so much. And I think one of the things that's the most important, we've all talked about what we've learned about the ability to, first of all, have a dream, follow that dream, have a goal, set out a path, be determined, be persistent, show up. And then the thing is about never giving up.
Right.
And over and over and over again, because people were not going to always be successful. But the idea that you show up and think about there's always another game. John Madden has a great quote. He goes, "Great athletes have short memories." And I'm like, what does that mean? Well, think about that. You know, there's always another game. There's always another race. And I wanted to add the most important, the thing that Annie talked about dads and the connection with their daughters. I think one of the most important factors for post-Title IX with the opportunities have been dads with daughters who are concerned and intent that they're not going to let their daughters be shortchanged.
Yes.
And that's really, really important. I think they deserve a lot of credit for that.
Yes, I agree. I agree, very much so.
And the terminology we use a little bit is called transferable skills, and the skills that are being developed as a student athlete, how do those carry over, not only into the workplace, but also into your personal life? And I've often thought how great the world would be if we moved past our own self-interest. And when you become part of a team, and those of us that were pre-Title IX, you know, I was a cheerleader, I was in the band, I was in anything that created this sort of team environment. And then how do you carry those skills? Seriously, I don't think there's a better training ground for young men or young women than to participate in something that is larger than yourself. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts that athletics gives us.
I agree. And clearly the statistics that we heard a little while ago about the importance of sport to everyone, boys, girls, men, women. But when we look at the fact that what I think the statistic is something like 85% of women who are in Fortune 500 companies played organized sports. And there's a connection. There is definitely a connection. And again, sort of thinking along those lines and listening to Dr. Edwards' remarks earlier about not being able to package and sell women's sports. You know, we talked about recognition and talked about the importance of sport, yet he's right. It's still, oh yeah, and the women's sports are on later, or they're on a different channel. You know, thinking along those lines, how would you package them? What do you think the answer is to? I mean, we have amazing women's basketball, amazing women's hockey, and soccer, and on and on and on. What are your ideas? How do we do that? How do we bring that to the fore?
I think, my colleagues here, what an honor to be on the stage with the three of them.
Isn't it?
Anyway. Yes.
It's amazing.
And you too, Kat, yes. You know, it's interesting, if I asked the audience to tell me the most popular men's basketball player in the country today, what would their answer be? And then if I asked you to tell me the most popular women's basketball player, what would the answer be? Or in women's tennis, besides the Williams sisters, who's the #1 professional in this tennis player? Or even in golf, you know, who's the #1 women's golfer in America? It actually happens to be Lexi Thompson, and I remember that just because I love the name. Lexi Thompson is just such a great name. But I think the problem is when you look in the sports section in those 7 pages that come out every single day, you know, how much of that print is actually allocated to women's sports, which is very, very little. And so what we have to do is to, I think, promote what's happening in our sport, and in particular promote the women, whether if you look at women's soccer and even what Brandy Chastain and Mia Hamm and names like that. I mean,
when I was, getting out of college, I mean, Ann was famous. She was the most visible women's basketball player. And I'm not sure today people would know who the most visible women's basketball. They don't.
Yeah.
And so
unless you live in Storrs, Connecticut.
Yeah, that's true. And that's the other thing. If I was to ask the audience who's going to win the men's Final Four, there would be a number of different answers. And who's going to win the women's Final Four? Which simply the answer would be Connecticut, because the parity is deeper in the men's side than on the women's side. So, I mean, I don't want to take up too much of the time, but it's my belief is as we continue to promote and market women's sports, it's the individuals that are associated with those sports that can elevate.
Okay.
So just to add to that, back from the ABL days, trying to get people to come into the stadiums and all of that, we had some great stories. A woman in San Jose, in the San Jose Mercury News, was very nice to us. She sent me a letter and she said, Ann, she said, I never really cared much about basketball until I started watching the San Jose Lasers playing. And now I'm the first one in my house to get out and get the newspaper to see how they did. So you have to see somebody that looks like you, that is like you. In the paper, unfortunately, the papers don't have much space anymore. So I don't know, it's the social media thing, and that's a whole nother story.
Yes.
But I think the Women's Sports Foundation talked about maybe less than 10% of the space in a sports page is ever devoted to women's sports. So how are women going to follow sports if they don't know about, if there's no space? And horses at some point got more space than women did. So that's kind of a problem, right?
Yeah. Yes, I would think so. Yes, unless of course you're from Kentucky. Yeah.
This is true. This is
I'm going to take just a little bit of a different tact, and that is right now I'm going to take kind of the International Olympic Committee and governance structure tact. Because it's at the governance level that decisions are made and influence is made. And right now, of the 99 IOC members, I think only 24 or so are board members, so less than 25%. And worldwide, in my sport, in this last, I've been chairing a commission for women. This is the second quad that I've been doing that. The first quad, we fought for 30% and got it for the executive committee, and we're fighting for 30% on all of the commissions. But we have such a long way to go in governance. And governance is where the big decisions are made about television revenues and how things are going to go. I have to tell you, for a sport like fencing, when NBC started to have all of the coverage on the web and people could access it whenever they wanted, it's had a tremendous impact on the popularization of many sports. And I kind of believe in numbers, that we've got to get numbers in governance, and then more access then allows more opportunities, and then more people are in positions of power to do things. So I would really hope that young women would turn their interest towards that and go into those kind of difficult governance spaces and take that on, because there's a lot of work to be done. And women from countries like the US, Canada, Great Britain need to really assist and help women from all over the world in partnership and bringing those voices to the table. So,
yes, absolutely.
Well, and certainly internationally, you're dealing with a different thought process too, because most of the men in the Middle East, Africa, South America think about women not very highly. How to promote the women in, we live in a sexist world. We really do. And Dr. Edwards was talking about that in the sense that you look at the NCAA sports in women and men, and what do the women wear? Track and field, swimming and diving, volleyball. You go on and on. Basketball probably has the biggest uniforms. And so certainly look is a part of how you present something. And certainly I think the men's basketball uniforms are too big. They're too long. I want shorter shorts. And so there's a selling product. And it is a product that you're selling out there. And certainly I think that I remember talking to Sue Gunner, Hall of Fame coach from LSU, and she was our assistant coach on the Olympic team in '76, and she talked about when she went to LSU, they said, well, we're not going to cover you because you don't have any people there. And said, we'll bring people there. You've got to cover us in order to bring people there.
Right.
So it's this kind of catch-22 what is back and forth. But, you know, mostly the people that are in charge of making decisions in the news, or whether, again, we go to ESPN, but there are other networks, and certainly with social media today and podcasts and so forth, but they're usually men making the decision on how much time or what kind of input you're going to have as far as women's sports. So, you know, a lot of that comes from, I think, a lot of women, too, that have to step up because, you know, like Ann was saying, you've got a reporter, but a lot of times women in writing also, they want to be on men's sports because that's what's in the newspaper or that's what's on air. And not to say that they don't support women, but they're not, those articles aren't written about as much. And so it's kind of a catch-22 for women, too, in the sense of supporting each other. And so how do you get more women's sports on is basically the question. And certainly it's gotten better and better, and we just have to keep working behind the scenes.
There's a lot of room for improvement, and we certainly are better. I remember the days when the women's Final Four, literally the Final Four, was the only women's basketball that was on during the tournament.
And it goes right up against the Dinah Shore, which is not the Dinah Shore.
Of course. And just, so I am very excited to sit in front of the television on Selection Monday and write out my brackets, because we didn't always get to do that. So we have come a long way, but you're right, it's top to bottom.
I just wanted to add something to Annie's point, too, about the fact that women really bear a responsibility to be an audience, to go to the games, to find out when your college teams are playing, and to show up. Because everybody's looking for numbers. Television's looking for numbers. The writers are looking for numbers. The sponsors are looking for numbers. And so if we can't have numbers of people sitting in the seats, then it doesn't help us very much.
That's exactly right.
And many women who haven't been part of sports in the past don't understand why it's important. And so we tried to make the case in the ABL to the AAUW, who has been a supporter of women's rights forever and ever and ever. You know, we're the flag wavers. And they're like, well, why should we do that?
Yes.
Well, because it's important, right?
For
our
all
little
of the
girls.
reasons we've talked about.
And I think it's just as important that the men show up and that
Absolutely.
They support women. I think all of us up here at some point, at least I know just personally for myself, you know, I wouldn't be the athletics director at San Jose State if it wasn't for the men that helped me along the way.
Of course.
Athletics has and you know, probably will be a very white male-dominated profession, and certainly my women colleagues and mentors are important, but it's crucial that men support women in everything that we do. And certainly women need to support men also, but when you think about how do we take women's athletics, or how do we, you know, as you mentioned, if there's only 9 of us out of 130, I often think 2 things. One, I better not screw it up. I'll set women 25 years back.
No pressure at all.
Yeah, no pressure. But secondly, and more importantly, I love the fact that it gives attention to San Jose State, and in particular to the athletics program. I mean, I'm very, very proud of that. But we have to have help, and men need to help women just as much as we need women helping women, if not more, because they continue to be so often the decision makers.
Yes.
I want to piggyback on that just a little bit, because before coming here on the lead up, I was sending, you know, Twitters and doing Facebook and everything, and all of a sudden, I got responses back from the men's football team. And I went, all right. They were right there with us. And
and they will all be here after the 10 o'clock break.
That's really great.
Every one of them will be sitting
Excellent.
there. And they're here because someday they're going to have daughters.
Yes.
They currently have girlfriends that are athletes. It's just as important for them to hear what's happening today as it is for women.
I agree.
And just a follow-up on the athletic director thing, too. From my perspective, I'm not saying I'm right. but I think it's very difficult, too, for women to be in that position as an athletic director. Now it's a lot of fundraising, too, but also if you were to go to Alabama and be a female athletic director, you would find that it'd be very difficult, because I think women do have to be a lot stronger, because you're talking about alumni, and the alumni in football is a different mindset. And I know of some women athletic directors that have been at big name schools, and they've struggled because the alumni don't relate to a woman as far as an athletic director and the fundraising. And so that is
well, and there's a sense that in order to manage and lead a Division I football program, that you, A, had to play football. Well, that takes us out. And then B, you have to be a man, so that takes us out. So we're 0 for 2 before we even start. But to think that I couldn't command a room of 100 football players and 15 football coaches is not only disrespectful to women, but it's also disrespectful to men.
Yes.
And you're absolutely right, though, Ann, about the you know, it used to be with Title IX was coming along, there were so many people who really wanted 3 genders, men, women, and football.
Yes.
You know, they didn't want football to be, I go, no, there's only 2. There's not 3 to be part of the equation. But that's where men need to help us.
Yes.
You know, if my major donors, you know, most of them are men, they need to accept the fact that, you know, and they have to trust that I'm managing this athletic program at the direction of the president, that my values and that I'm in line with the mission of the university. But they have to help me.
Right.
Yes.
It's
because,
a team effort.
Yes.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I think that's really, really important.
Yes, I agree. And I think we only have a few minutes left, and I'm not sure there. But I would like for you guys to, if you would just tell us what you would like current female athletes to know from your perspective. What advice would you give young women who want to be athletes regardless of the sport?
So I think that's really easy. I mean, I think it's really important that young women athletes know about Title IX and understand about Title IX and not forget about Title IX. Not that they have to have it right in front of them all the time, but I think it's really important that we don't forget about it because it still needs to be protected. It is under siege in a lot of places, and it causes a lot of misunderstanding in a lot of places. And I just think it's important for us to know the history so that we don't repeat the mistakes.
And I think be grateful for the opportunity, because I think the young athletes today, they just assume that they're getting a scholarship, which is great. And which, you know, a lot of women didn't have that opportunity, and for me to be the first, didn't know that I would get a scholarship, but certainly to be not only grateful for that opportunity, but to know that they're in a position that they're going to make a difference and that they're going to be history. So to stand up for what's right, not to, you know, to use sports to their advantage to really further their career and who they are.
Yes, very good.
I think I have on my mind, coming from Florida, Parkland, that recently happened. Yes. And you see the power of students. And so there is great power in student athletes.
Yes, very much.
They have moved the Florida legislature, which is incredible, and moving the rest of the nation. And so I think that athletes in social justice and in equity can come together and move mountains. They have tremendous power, and to utilize that in the best way to make this a more inclusive society for all of us.
Very good.
Yeah. And I would like women student athletes that are at San Jose State, and actually women student athletes throughout the country, to really believe in themselves, to really know that through sport, with their shoulders back and their head up, that they can gain the confidence that they need to go out and navigate and manage the ups and downs of life. I think, you know, you get asked that question, you know, what would you tell your younger self? And I would tell my younger self that, you know, to believe that I could be an athletics director. I never thought I was going to be one. I mean, it wasn't exactly this path of opportunity in front of me. If today there's only 9 of us, actually I think there might be 10 right now instead of 9. So we're making a little bit of headway there.
We don't want to leave anyone out.
But for women everywhere to actually believe that they can do some of the things that they want to do. I think by nature, women, we doubt ourselves. It's one of the things I love about men. They're very, very confident. And they think they can do just about anything. Well, you know what? Women, we got to think that way. And I think through sport, that is where women will gain strong self-esteem. It's where they'll gain confidence. And then, again, those transferable skills help them navigate into their personal relationships and into their profession. So I would tell young people, believe. And through sport, you can acquire the skill set that will help you manage your life.
And I don't think we can wrap it up any better than that. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, there will be a 15-minute intermission. If exiting the building during the intermission, please have your ticket available for re-entry.
Nancy Hogshead Makar is a legendary Olympic champion and an award-winning civil rights lawyer. She has a commitment to gender equality and a belief that sport can be an effective vehicle for social change. Nancy's entrance into the national swimming world started at just 12 years old when she broke the American age group record and qualified for the U.S. Senior Nationals. She broke her first American record at just 14 years old and never looked back. She won the Nathan Mallison Award, given to Florida's outstanding athlete, and the prestigious Kipeth Award, given to the best all-around swimmer in America. She qualified for the 1980 Olympic team, but sadly, the U.S. boycott of the Olympics in Russia due to Soviet military aggression in Afghanistan kept her home. Nancy then enrolled in Duke University, where she earned a full athletic scholarship, one of the first thanks to Title IX, a relatively new federal statute that provided for equal athletic opportunities in educational institutions. Through high school and college dual meets, she was undefeated. Then, at the 1984 Olympics, Nancy Hogshead Makar capped her long swimming career, where she won 3 gold medals and 1 silver medal. Hogshead Makar has been inducted into 11 Halls of Fame, including the International Swimming Hall of Fame and the International Women's Sports Hall of Fame. She graduated with honors from Duke and then Georgetown Law. She's now a lawyer, a scholar, an author, public speaker, and activist. She says her sport career gave her more than medals. It gave her valuable life lessons and a commitment to empowerment. She also saw how sports could be a powerful platform for social change. Hogshead Makar began her advocacy work with Women's Sports Foundation, starting as a college intern, becoming the organization's president, then serving as their director of advocacy. Hogshead Makar practiced law at Holland & Knight and was a tenured professor of law where she taught sports law courses. Nancy Hogshead Makar now leads Champion Women, a nonprofit leading targeted efforts to advocate for equality and access in sport. Targeted efforts designed to get change for girls and women to scale. Focus areas include equal play, sexual harassment, abuse, and assault in sport, as well as employment, pregnancy, and LGBT discrimination. As an internationally recognized legal expert on sports issues, Hogshead Makar is a frequent keynote speaker and has been called to testify in Congress numerous times, written scholarly and lay articles, and is a frequent guest on national news programs, including CNN, ESPN, NPR, Fox News, MSNBC, and 60 Minutes. Her book, co-authored with Andrew Zimbalist, Equal Play, Title IX, and Social Change, has received acclaim. She was the lead author of Pregnant and Parenting Student Athletes, Resources and Model Policies, published by the NCAA and distributed to all member schools. She serves as an expert witness in sports cases and has written amicus briefs representing athletic organizations in precedent-setting litigation. Hogshead Makar's service to the sports world is long. She is currently serving on the NCAA's Task Force on Gender Equality, the advisory boards of the Association of Title IX Administrators, the Aspen Institute's Sports and Society, and the One Love Foundation. For 10 years, she was the co-chair of the American Bar Association Committee on the Rights of Women. Hogshead Makar has received significant awards from numerous sports and women's organizations that recognize her commitment to girls and women in athletics, including the International Olympic Committee's Women and Sport Award and an honorary doctorate. Sports Illustrated magazine listed her as one of the most influential people in the history of Title IX. She and her husband, Scott Makar, a judge on Florida's 1st District Court of Appeal, have a son and twin daughters. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Olympic champion, award-winning lawyer, and CEO of Champion Women, Nancy Hogshead Makar.
Hello, everybody. Oh, I cannot tell you what a privilege that it is to be able to speak with you all here today. Thank you all very much for having me here. I'm going to give a little bit different type of talk here today. I want to talk about being an advocate, and as well as talking about one specific area of advocacy. I was always interested in gender, primarily because I grew up 0.02% of Caucasian women have the ability to put on muscle. I am that 0.02%. So I had people ask me if I was taking steroids or if I have tremendous empathy for both lesbians and for transgendered kids, because I used to, be walking into the restroom and somebody say, "Hey, that sign says women." I'm a girl. And like that was happening at like age 12, 13, 14 years old. So today, nobody questions, but during my competing years, they absolutely did. So I was always really interested in gender, and being a female athlete, I was aware constantly, and I call them the gender police, had to tell me that what I was doing was not conforming to gender norms. And so it really pulled me into this idea of we want to make sure that girls and women have opportunities in sports. I got so much out of being an athlete, and we want to make sure that those gender police don't keep people from being able to get everything that our last panel just talked about. So I call it the animal lane. Being an advocate is like being in the animal lane. In swimming, the animal lane is where the distance swimmers go, and they're in I see some people nodding. They're in their far lane, and they just grind it out, okay? So an advocate needs to be able to say the same thing over and over and over again with no loss of enthusiasm. All right, I'm going to talk about a very yucky subject right now. We're going to talk about sexual abuse. And when I post something on Facebook that has anything to do with sexual abuse, my first 3 responses, I guarantee you, are going to be: number 1, kill him; number 2, put him in prison for the rest of his life; number 3, chop off his testicles. Okay? Now, Larry Nassar is an outlier, him getting 175 years. For the vast majority of sexual abusers, none of those 3 are going to happen. But they demonstrate that we're in this emotional part of the brain that is so freaked out by the idea of sexual abuse, particularly of children, that we can't move into the thinking part of the brain that really looks at the issue of what do we do about it, and how do we empower children, how do we protect children, and how do we protect athletes, okay? I'm not just interested in the child, I'm also interested in the 24-year-old who is just as liable for somebody with Weinstein-like power. Okay, so everybody ready? Thinking, moving into the thinking part. Okay, February 14th, 2018, we just got a new statute. Whew. Who would have thought, with this president, with this Congress, that we were able to get a statute that passed only 3 no votes? So that's 535 legislators in the House and Senate, 3 no votes total. And then, while President Trump is having problems with women's issues in his own staff, he signed the bill into law. Whew. So this was not something that just happened, okay? This is something that had been brewing for a long time. I wrote the first draft of a statute that would protect athletes back in 2013. This was not new news, but it took a while before that was going to happen. These are the gymnasts here, and what we're laughing about is just how much bigger I am than they are. They were like, okay. All right, so to solve the issue of sexual abuse in sport, rather than thinking about what can we do to protect these athletes, instead think about power. Think about how power plays into this issue of sexual abuse. Now, I'm not saying men don't get sexually abused. They absolutely do. They absolutely do. But the ratio of men to women, it happens much, much more frequently to girls and women. So, all right, so how did Larry Nassar happen? Okay, and how did all these other cases of sexual abuse how did it happen? It happened by a number of decisions that were made at the Olympic level. So first I'm going to talk about what happened inside the Olympic Committee, okay? Inside the Olympic Committee, so the 1978 Amateur Sports Act, how many of you know, by show of hands, you can tell I was a professor of law, how many of you all know about the Amateur Sports Act? Okay, so the Olympic movement is governed by a statute, okay? And it gives the Olympic Committee, this umbrella organization, a lot of power over all these different national governing bodies. So it gives them power in several different ways. One is 20% of all committees and board members are to be athletes, okay? 2 is they have this position called the athlete ombudsman, and it is supposed to be the person who represents the athlete's interest when there's any conflict between them and their national governing body. Okay? So there's the USOC, and then there's 47 different national governing bodies that are underneath there, right? So USA Swimming, USA Taekwondo, USA Gymnastics, right? All the 47 different sports under there. So it's, look, we're all human. There's going to be conflict when it comes to athletes having conflict with their national governing body, right? Whether it's money or facilities or injuries, or there's going to be conflict. Who do you go to? All right, so the athlete ombudsman was supposed to be like their representative, and then USOPA. So an athlete, under the terms of the Sports Act, is pretty young. They have to be within 10 years of competing at an Olympic or Pan Am or international, right? So within 10 years, right, so probably top out at, what, 35? Which I think of at my age is like mere children. So when they age out, they go to USOPA, the United States Olympians and Paralympians Association. Okay? All right, so what happened to those sources of power for the athletes? Well, Scott Blackmun and the board of the United States Olympic Committee systematically took away those sources of power for athletes to be able to get help. One is, rather than having the athlete ombudsman report directly to the athletes, the athlete ombudsman now reported to Scott Blackmun and the board of the USOC. So the athlete ombudsman was unable to have a position that was separate from the corporation of the USOC, right? So when there was a conflict between them, they were unable to. The USOC picked who this 20% was, right? So the athletes weren't able to say, well, we want our person to be on the board. And instead, it wasn't somebody who was an athlete advocate. It was somebody who was a corporation advocate. Okay? And then that person got reappointed without any input from the AAC. The AAC is the representative of athletes from all the different national governing bodies. Okay? Then Scott Blackmun and the Olympic Committee turned USOPA into a fundraising arm rather than a source of wisdom and a source of wise experience that comes from being an older athlete. So they had already fought these battles in the 70s and the 80s, and right? They knew where the power conflicts were, and they literally took that power away, saying, we will not fund you, or threatened to. They weren't quite that obvious about it, but the threat was there that we won't fund you if this continues. And fourth, and most alarmingly, which we saw this a lot in gymnastics, is they allowed NGBs to have more and more subjective criteria over who made the Olympics. So if you want compliance and obedience from an athlete, the way to do it is to take away their power. They're dependent on the coach liking them, okay? In the sport of swimming, first or second Olympic trials, even if you've won world records and it doesn't matter how successful the person is, they have to first or second Olympic trials. Gymnastics, I mean, you can be 10th at Olympic trials and still be on the top 5. You can still make that team, right? So you have to ingratiate, you have to be liked. And if you have to be that obedient, how much power does somebody have? So this is there was the mantra, which sounds good, right? It was one team, Blackmun's idea, one team, we're all together, we're all in this together. But what it ended up doing was squashing dissent, okay? So an athlete now can't get help inside the Olympic Committee. Okay, what about outside the Olympic Committee? Who do you get to help you, okay? So there are definitely Sports Act remedies. They have a AAA arbitration provision. You can bring a Section 9 or Section 10 complaint, okay? But guess what? There's a big problem with that, and that is there's no attorney's fee provision, which means that you either have to find an attorney who can do it pro bono, and like a Section 10 complaint is about a $250,000 complaint, or two is you have to be independently wealthy. And let me assure you, those athletes are few and far between. So, all right, so the act is, while it's technically there, it's hard to use. Okay, so now we get to civil liability. Well, this is where you just bring a lawsuit and you say, you, national governing body, were negligent in taking care of me, and so I got hurt as a result of it, and so I'm suing you under negligence, right? You failed to exercise reasonable care on my behalf, and so you owe me money, okay? So I'm going to talk about some tort law principles and negligence. All right. So first of all, the USOC, when it knew about there were problems within the national governing body, they knew were not complying with the Sports Act, which guaranteed the athletes to have certain rights. They knew about it. Their thinking was, well, we'll just let the athlete bring the Section 9 or Section 10 complaint. Okay? So instead of them using their own authority and power to go in there and say, hey, NGB, you can't treat athletes that way, the thinking was, or the PR that they've been selling you all is that these are independent businesses and we can't do anything about it. I'm here to tell you as an attorney, that's not true. The Sports Act already gives them all the authority they need to be able to go in and remedy these problems, but they were not doing it. All right. All right, so tort law, okay? Under tort law, you'll see first-year law school students walking around going, duty, breach, causation, damages. That's what you need to be able to have a cause of action for a negligence claim. So to say that somebody else's negligence caused you harm, and to be able to recover for that, you have to have those 4 elements. What the U.S. Olympic Committee did was to use the no-duty rules, okay? So these people over here, that's my family. Aren't they adorable? Okay. So I owe a legal duty to them. If we're walking across the street and there's a car that's coming and I don't help them, I don't prevent them from getting harmed, they can actually sue me for not preventing that harm, okay? So forget about the fact that they're my family members or whatnot, okay? But I owe them a legal duty. You all get that, okay? So this was when I got the award. I love all these people. That's Anita DeFrance, who was one of my mentors when I was a mere 24 years old. Who's over there. That's Prince Albert. I always say that he married a swimmer and I married a prince. So, right, so that's, Thomas Bach. I care about those people. If we're walking across the street together, easy as pie, I can touch him with a finger and I can prevent him from being harmed, but I don't. He can't sue me because I could have prevented the harm and didn't, okay? But if I tell Thomas Bach that, hey, this is a dangerous intersection. Let me help you across the street. Okay? Then, if I do a bad job of it, he can sue me. Get it? So what the Olympic Committee did and what national governing bodies did was to say, not our job. They relied on these tort no-duty rules to be able to avoid liability. Okay? And I'm going to show you in just a second, but the second thing I want to say while I'm still on the slide is insurance. Clubs had to buy their insurance from national governing bodies, and the national governing bodies, they had a separate policy that was just for sexual abuse. In United States Swimming, it was $100,000, and it was called a wasting policy, which meant defendants' fees came off the top, which meant that pretty much plaintiffs' lawyers figured out there's really nothing I can do here for this kid, which means that sort of a mechanism of what makes somebody take care of somebody else, right, civil liability, wasn't there, okay? This slide, I thought, I'm going to have to read this to this group because it's such a terrible slide. But we have this enormous slide, so I will not have to do that. So this is actually from the brief, and you'll see the highlighted part. Plaintiffs' negligence-based claims, so these are the gymnasts that were hurt in the Larry Nassar case. They were sexually abused, okay? Fail as a matter of law because USA Gymnastics did not owe a legal duty to these plaintiffs. Okay? I had been saying this, no joke, for 8 years. Hey, they're relying on me, right? But it's kind of hard to understand. It's not until the Larry Nassar case that people woke up. So 2 things happened right in a row. One is when the Me Too movement happened, everybody recognized how ubiquitous sexual harassment and sexual abuse and sexual assault was in women's lives. It is second thing that happened is that with the Larry Nassar trial, with it being live streamed, with having 250 victims, we all got to experience just how damaging sexual abuse is and what it meant. It was very different for all these women, right? To have it live streamed, to have the people be able to go and see it. This was a moment in the culture that we have never seen before. So number one, we recognized, wow, it happens to a lot of women. And then 2 is, wow, and it really interferes with their lives. So, and then right shortly thereafter, the statute gets passed. So we do have this new statute, and I hope that you all will look at it and see what's all required and whatnot. But one of the main things it did was it established a separate entity, kind of like USADA. You guys know what USADA is, United States Anti-Doping Agency, that they do all the drug testing for the Olympic athletes. So it's a separate entity that will do the investigation and sanctioning coaches and athletes and others who commit sexual abuse, right? So we got to figure out another way, because the average victim, particularly of child sexual abuse, takes 21 years to come forward. 21 years, right? But meanwhile, that coach is still coaching. We got to get him out of sport, right? So this new entity, I wrote the first draft of what this entity should look like in 2013. I was talking about it, right? But nobody was picking up on the idea, so I thought, well, I'll just write the draft, and then surely they will enact it. And, oh man, talk about being in the animal lane for a very long time. I'm going to skip this because I'm running low on time. In Title IX world, there's a lot of complaint about the preponderance of the evidence standard to determine whether or not somebody should stay in school. Interesting, we just passed a statute that requires the preponderance of the evidence standard when it comes to kicking people out of sport, having the same kind of effect. So, in conclusion, I just want to say that we have come an awful long way, but the passage of a statute and getting this kind of recognition is really the starting point. I've been involved with Title IX litigation, being involved in athletics and making sure that schools had equal opportunities and athletic opportunities for most of my professional career. And the passage of the law in 1972 was the starting point. The Safe Sport Act is the starting point. We are just now recognizing, how do we give athletes power over their athletic careers so that they can predict and prevent sexual abuse? How do you take that away from coaches who are accustomed to having Weinstein-like power and still allow them to enable these athletes to be amazing athletes, right? How do you do that? So, so thank you all very much. Here's how you can reach me or contact me. Please do. And it's a privilege to be able to be here. And now it's a privilege for me to get to be able to introduce to you all, or introduce the video of Brenda Tracy. Take it away. Thank you.
In 1998, I was drugged and brutally gang raped by 4 men. 2 of those men played football for Oregon State University. As a victim, I did everything I was supposed to do to pursue justice. I couldn't have known it then, but filing a criminal report against football players led to a backlash from my community that left me feeling defeated and suicidal. So much so that I gave up and I dropped the charges. In 2011, the U.S. Department of Education issued a Dear Colleague letter, which emphasized the importance of how to adequately address sexual assault and rape on our college campuses. And from that letter, a national spotlight was cast on issues of sexual assault and physical violence that reached far beyond our college campuses. But how much progress have we really made since then? rape happened almost 20 years ago, and today not much has changed. So what can we do about it? We can begin by educating our men and boys about consent and healthy relationships. And we have to start setting the expectation with our athletes that sexual assault and physical violence are never okay. Because what would it look like if every 8th grade boy knew he wouldn't get to play high school football if he committed a violent act? What if every young man in high school knew that if he committed a violent act, he wouldn't get to play for his dream college? And what if every college athlete knew there was no chance of signing an NFL contract if he committed a violent act? And even more importantly, what are the conversations everyone around this young man will now have with him? So coaches, and I'm not just talking to football coaches, I'm talking to all of you. I'm challenging you to set the expectation with your players. And to help you do this, I've created a pledge, which you can download at my website at brendatracy.com. By signing this pledge, you and your players are committing to be leaders in changing the culture of violence at your school, in your community, in your state, and ultimately the entire nation. You have the opportunity to be the solution. Set the expectation.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brenda Tracy.
Oh, I love you.
Hi. Hi. I have asthma. I'm not contagious, everybody. So Brenda, so tell us about, you got to talk to the football team yesterday. So
I did, and you guys are here. Thank you for coming.
Yay.
Let's give them a round of applause. I did, and it was actually a really amazing time for me. I really enjoy the time I spend with the football teams that I work with, and yesterday was especially good. The guys were engaged, they were listening, which is always nice, especially when you're kind of talking about the worst moment in your life.
Right.
To have people paying attention matters, but they were engaged. They stayed after, we chatted, we took a photo. It was good.
So I always say that what victims need is they need to be believed that it happened. And number two is they need to be believed in the depth of the emotional harm that it caused in order for them to move on, right? So I'm from Iowa, and in Iowa, they firmly believe in this idea that people are as happy as they make up their mind to be, kind of that Abraham Lincoln kind of thinking, right? Just get over it, okay? But talk about those two aspects as it related to your experience, being believed that it happened, and then being believed in the depth of the emotional harm that it caused.
Yeah, well, before we talk about being believed, let's first talk about not being believed. And
yeah,
how
exactly.
that was
right.
for me too.
Right.
In 1998, when I came forward to the police and made my report that I had been gang raped by 4 football players, it was immediately a news story because 2 of the men went to Oregon State University. And they were all arrested and charged. They were facing 20 years in prison. And then the backlash started because we didn't have social media back then, but we had the newspaper, the radio, and the television, and I was the top story. I was Jane Doe, but everybody knew it was me. And the first thing my community did was say, who is she and why is she lying? Why is she trying to ruin these young men's promising football careers? And we still see that today. Still see it today. Anytime someone comes forward against a man of an athlete, a celebrity, power, death threats, the entire thing. And that pushed me into, a life of wanting to die. A lot of suicidal ideation, depression, PTSD, borderline eating disorder. I struggled for 16 years. And then when I came forward in 2014 again and shared my story, people believed me. My community rallied around me this time. Other survivors reached out to me and said, me too. And the university president issued a public apology to me. Everyone involved pretty much apologized to me. And that put me where I am today, like on this stage. Now I travel the country. I've been over to 60 schools in the last year and a half. I work with men. I'm a national voice on these issues. I was ESPN's 2016 Top 25 women, for athletes and influencers. I received a National Service Courage Award from the Obama administration, and my life has been transformed. And today, I don't want to die.
Yeah, yeah.
It's emotional still.
Right. So as soon as you were believed, then you didn't have a problem with people believing the depth of your emotional harm. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. When I share this with people, people get it. I mean, I'm still emotional. It's 20 years later, but I'm still very emotional about when I think about the pain I went through, and I see the Nassar victims speaking. I know that pain, and there's so many of us that know that pain. And the Me Too movement is so important because so many of us are saying, like, I understand your pain. I am living it too, and I have been silent, and I have been ashamed, and now I'm not going to be silent, and I'm not going to be ashamed. And it's okay for us to love on each other and support each other and heal together. And you don't have to be a survivor to understand my pain or their pain, but we can all heal together and support each other.
And that's why she's Brenda Tracy. So you and I were talking last night about sort of a model of how breast cancer has changed, like how the conversation around breast cancer. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we can. So I think you guys saw the hashtag Set the Expectation with the purple and teal ribbon. Teal is for sexual assault and purple is for domestic violence. But you know, when I first started doing this work, I was kind of traveling the country working with different coaches and realizing that some coaches were having these conversations about sexual violence and behavior. Some coaches weren't having them, and they were recruiting violent athletes onto their teams. And I thought, can we just all get on the same page and like just set the expectation that your behavior matters? Sexual assault and physical violence is not okay. And so I thought, how do we get everybody on the same page? How do we raise awareness? How do we tackle this? And I thought about the pink ribbon, and I thought, well, maybe I'll create my own ribbon for my own campaign. Because with breast cancer, we saw that the stigma was taken away. People started talking about it. People got involved. People got engaged. Survivors were honored. They were respected. They were taken care of. And we have inspired other people to get involved to figure out how do we cure breast cancer. Why can't we do that with a purple and a teal ribbon? Why can't we just do that with this subject?
Right.
And that's what I'm attempting to do.
Excellent. Yeah, my grandmother died of breast cancer because she was too ashamed to tell the doctor that she had a lump in her breast. So by the time that she did, it was too late. And then a year and a half ago, because of all of the work, I think, of the people that have put this out there, when I found a tiny, tiny lump, I went right to my doctor, and I found the smallest lump that my doctor had ever found. Not that records are important to me. But I was like, really? My husband like practically had to like hold me back. He was like, she's just giving her another record. Are you kidding me? No, but it was 1.2 centimeters. So because of all the research and all the bosom buddies and buddy checks and everything else, right? Teeny, teeny, tiny lumpectomy, no chemo, radiation. I mean, it sucked. It was awful, but it was nowhere near what it would have been in the days of my grandmother, who wouldn't have even known that they were supposed to check, right? So same thing with sexual harassment and assault is to lose the shame of going and getting help, to lose the shame of saying that they were sexually harassed or sexually abused or raped, right? So that people can say it and get help for it, so that people recognize that there is a pathway to be able to recover, okay?
Yeah, and some people say it's just a ribbon. Really?
Right.
Is it just a ribbon?
Right.
It's not just a ribbon.
Right. No, we have a lot of women walking around today alive with the tatas, some without the tatas, but because of that ribbon, because of all of the awareness.
To see the survivors of breast cancer who are proud, and we honor these survivors. I would love for us to honor survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence too in the same way, and have these survivors walk around with some pride in their head up. They did nothing wrong.
What was unique about the Larry Nassar situation, so I'm an expert witness in the case, I'm for 120 of them, and what was unique is how these victims, they had this unique opportunity to be able to come together. So imagine if you were in a room with 100, 200 other survivors who had undergone rape by powerful men, or maybe one powerful man, right? But to all be in the room together and to support each other's process, to honor each other, what that was like for them to, as you were saying, to honor them. Right now, I mean, I think our country really owes these girls and women, some of them were very young and some of them were women, but what they owe them is they showed the kind of vulnerability on what their experience with him that changed the whole conversation. So before the Nassar victims started speaking, we knew all the same facts. So we knew like how many victims, and we knew that he was doing it under the guise of medical, that he was inserting his hand into their vaginas and anuses and massaging their breasts, and we knew all the facts that was out there. But still, it didn't really register as like the horror that you only get by talking to a victim. I would say that your average person only hears the kind of vulnerability that Tracy shows and really sort of lets people get a glimpse of. Probably, you know, just the most intimate women in their lives. Their family members, or maybe I'm thinking like 5 to 10 women who really show other men how awful it was for them. And so here you got, you know, athlete after athlete after athlete going through and showing just how different that their experiences were. And I mean, we're talking, it caused athlete suicide, it caused family member suicides, it caused, you know, family troubles and alcoholism and just terrible, terrible effects that they suffered from. And I just think it was a cultural moment that I don't think we've ever seen before.
Well, and it's the missing piece, I think.
Right.
And this is something I do everywhere I go. The reason, and the football team can attest to this, I share my story in really graphic detail. Because if I say to you, I was gang raped by 4 men for 6 hours, I don't know what that means to you. But if I tell you what I went through that night in very graphic detail, you now have to see me as the victim that I am of a gang rape. And as I go on with my story, then you also have to see me as the survivor that I am. Because if I just say the small details, right, then you're probably sugarcoating it in your mind. You're probably making that gang rape okay for you so that you can be comfortable.
Right.
And for me, my job is to make you uncomfortable, because I think that until we're uncomfortable, we're not going to do anything. It's only when we're uncomfortable and we're angry and we're upset that we're called to action. And so that's why I do that. I wish that I didn't have to do that, but it's how I humanize the issue, and that's what we saw with these women. They were humanizing the issue. They took something that was reported maybe in the papers, and we were sugarcoating it in our mind, making it okay somehow, and then we saw a human, and we saw the human experience and the suffering that was going on and the lives that were impacted unnecessarily, and then we had to face it. We had to be uncomfortable, and we had to be angry, and then change will happen from there.
Right.
And hopefully someday we get to a place in our culture where I could just say, I was gang raped by 4 men for 6 hours, and you would take it seriously and understand the depth of my pain and everyone else's.
Right. That you wouldn't.
That's the dream. That I wouldn't have to go into those awful details and almost re-traumatize myself by going back there every single time.
Right. So, and so we didn't discuss this answer, so I hope I'm asking the right question here.
Yeah, we're winging it.
So is it helpful to you? Is it healing to you to talk about your experience? Does it help to put it in the right frame of your mind? Is it
it is helpful for me to share my story. It's difficult. You know, I have to go back to that apartment, and I have to go back into that trauma. because this is a heart issue, and I have to connect with my audience, and I have to connect with their hearts. So it is difficult, but you know, when I get to the part about my advocacy work and the things that I'm doing, and I get to meet these young men I work with afterwards, and they give me a hug, and they say thank you, and they share their own stories, and they tweet at me. We were trending on Twitter in San Jose last night. When those kinds of things happen, and when I see like the light bulbs go off in young men's heads about I'm the solution, that makes all of it worth it.
Oh, that's so great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to talk about was how that, one of the things that we talked about is how men are the solution.
Absolutely.
But before we get to that, I want to talk about how there are areas where the Me Too movement and Time's Up movement have really gone into in a big way, right? So the entertainment industry and a lot of academics and certainly into club and Olympic sports, right? We just got a statute passed one more time, woohoo! So, but there are areas where it has not gone. There has been no change. And what is that?
Sports.
Yeah, in sports.
Sports. We're not holding.
Why do you think it has not gone into powerful male athletes? Why hasn't it?
I mean, I think it has to do with several things. I think idolatry is one of them. I think that, you know, we as a society, there's nothing that we participate in more than sports, and it's mostly men's sports. But I think that we want to idolize our sports figures. We want to watch our games. We want to watch our football team, and we don't want our Sunday messed up by a rape victim. And the thing is that, you know, we victim blaming is what it really, for me, is what it's all about, right? Because if I can blame the victim, then I don't have to place any accountability or responsibility onto the perpetrator. So if I can say that, you know, it's her fault, she drank or she went somewhere she wasn't supposed to be going to, whatever it was that she did, then I don't have to deal with the fact that my favorite sports hero might actually be a rapist or an abuser. And therefore, I can just continue to idolize this person and watch my games because it's her fault. And now I don't have to do anything.
Right.
But what if it's not her fault, and what if he did it? Then we actually have to do something.
Right.
Then things have to change. Then do I get to watch do I watch my favorite football team then? Do I still idolize him? How do I separate this? Can I still say that this person is a great basketball player, but maybe they actually committed rape? How do I work that out in my own mind and my own heart?
And there's another piece to that, which is people identify with athletes in a way that they don't identify with people who are in business or right? Somebody who is a commentator on television or who is a politician or, right? But they identify with them like, that's me over there. Right.
Well, I think it's the heart and the spirit of athletics and athletes. Because I know as a survivor, for me, I really identify with athletes. I was an athlete in high school, but as a survivor, I identify with athletes with the heart because it's kind of like, as a survivor, we don't give up, right? You're tenacious. You have this never give up attitude, and you're motivated, and you surpass the odds, and you do all these great things that athletes do, right? But maybe I'm not an athlete, but my sport is life, you know, and I'm a champion too, and I'm winning.
Right.
And so there's a lot of that identity there.
You just hit on a great point, which is you do not have to be an elite athlete to get all the benefits of sports.
Right.
You participated in high school, and you still got all those benefits.
Absolutely.
Exactly, right?
Absolutely.
The things that Dr. Edwards was talking about on I am worthy, I'm important,
Absolutely.
I can make my own destination, I'm not subject to patriarchy, I can make my own.
Absolutely. I was, you know, as a child, I was first abused as a very small child by a family member, and then later raped as a 9-year-old by my high school babysitter's boyfriend. Was in a domestic violence relationship with my children's father. But sports really for me in junior high and high school was the only place I mattered. It was my sanctuary. And I think for a lot of athletes, that is the one place. I had those coaches that were everything to me. They were more like father figures and a mother figure. And I excelled, and people loved me, and they respected me. It was really the only place that I mattered. And I remember when I didn't have sports anymore, there was this adjustment period of, well, who am I? But I also recognized I still had that heart of an athlete to not ever give up, and that I could do anything. And I've always carried that heart with me, I think, and that's why I think I have survived.
Right, that you got those skills through playing sports. Yeah,
absolutely.
There's great research that what she's saying is true, that how people typically do in education is directly related to what kind of parents that they come from, what kind of family, what kind of socioeconomic, what their zip code is, right? So there's a direct one-on-one correlation. So what can a student do to help them break out of and to out-predict what it is that they would have done? So other after-school activities like being in the student council, or being on the editor of the yearbook, or to be in the debate team, or whatever else. None of those do it. They don't out-predict what somebody would be expected to do educationally. Only sports gives that extra bump to out-predict how somebody would have achieved educationally, life matters, etc. So, yeah.
Which is why, with the pledge, I talk about, like, and part of that is we attach grades also to eligibility, right? We can't not talk about that.
Sure, yeah.
So what if we attach behavior to eligibility
and, it's interesting, when the NCAA set minimum educational standards for athletes being able to play in college, guess what happened? Athletes did better. Right? More students did well academically. You had the NCAA going to high schools, and they actually went in and looked and saw how somebody's grades were, and did they actually take courses. And sometimes, some students got kind of the raw end of the deal because their school was, they just named the class kind of funky, and so they didn't realize really this is like Literature 1 or English 2 or something like that, right? So they did, but true, some athletes did not get to play in college sports, but overall, athletes started performing academically better when they knew that their athletic participation was tied with their academic participation. So what if their behavior standards impacted whether or not they got to be able to participate?
Right, and the biggest thing for me is what about the people around the athlete? Because now the behavior matters, then we're going to have conversations about consent, healthy relationships, respect. Because we're forced. Right. Well, we're not forced, but people are going to think, like, what do I need to do to keep my son or my daughter eligible? The coach is going to be thinking, what I need to keep everybody eligible. Everybody's going to be thinking about eligibility, because that really is.
It really is.
A huge topic for our athletes. And so we're going to be vested in making sure that our athletes understand about these topics.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my mentors, we're learning more and more about trauma. Did anybody see the Oprah Winfrey segment on 60 Minutes that looked at how trauma impacts a child's behavior, right? You talked about some early trauma that you had in life. Anybody see that? Okay, good, a lot of you. I hope if you get an opportunity to see that, because it really plays on, I'm an attorney, and when people call me, they need me to help them with their issue. And so I'm not a therapist, I don't play one on television. But the more I learn about trauma, the more I can help the victim be able to sort of understand what it is that's happening to them. The more that I can help them sort of, again, I'm not a therapist, and I always have to remind myself, like, you got to send them to a therapist, okay? First of all, it's a ton of time. And two is, I'm just not trained to be able to do that. One of the things that we know really helps people who have undergone trauma is hard physical labor, hard physical activities that people do, right? So when I was a sophomore in college, I was out running. Duke has 2 campuses, East and West, and so I was pulled into the woods and raped for about 2.5 hours. And it was as as humiliating and as degrading and as awful an experience as you can imagine, okay?
Okay.
And I suffered from terrible, terrible PTSD. And what I didn't have that I wanted with all of my heart, like I still get a little choked up when I think about what I wanted so badly, was I wanted a 40-year-old woman to come to me and say, it happened to me and I'm okay. I'm still getting choked up because I didn't have that. And I went to the library and I looked for, like, you know, who could I, like, there was no Brenda Tracy. There wasn't somebody who had two beautiful children, and she just showed me a picture of her grandchild who is adorable.
Thank you.
And, right, but there was not, like, there was no role model, right? So when you read something about rape or sexual assault, it was like everything I was feeling, which was red hot anger and hyper, like I was scared all the time, like, you know, looking around and having really hard time sleeping. And I developed this sort of crazy behavior of, I couldn't, I used to check the door to make sure it was locked before I went to sleep. And so checking the doors and windows, like, okay, after only 3 days of like getting up like, a dozen times to make sure that the doors are windows and locked, you know the doors are windows and locked. But I'd be lying there in bed and saying like, Nancy, you know they're locked. Don't go check and go make sure. And I couldn't help myself. I just had to like get up and make, look at the line where the light would shine through and see the dock was, okay, it's locked, okay. Go back down and, 20, right? Yeah. So I knew it was crazy and I was embarrassed that I was crazy. And I didn't want to even tell my therapist how crazy I was thinking. And so we were talking about how people need two things, right? They need to be believed that it happened, and they need to be believed in the depth of their emotional harm. So nobody didn't believe me that it happened. I really was beaten up very badly. And if there is a way to be lucky in having been raped, it is to be raped by somebody who has no power. So in that regard, I was lucky. So he was a stranger. I hadn't been drinking. It was one of the, and he wasn't, the head of a movie theater. He was not a professional athlete. He had no fan base, right? So people believed that it happened, right? But then there were plenty of people who were like, come on, let's get on with life, but there were enough people who did believe, and in particular, Duke University, their administration, one thing was I got a ton of parking tickets because I was too freaked out to go park far away. We called it Guam, and a lot of times there weren't parking spaces available, so I would like drive up on the grass that was really close to where I was living. So I got a ton of parking tickets. So rather than like yell at me about not parking where I was supposed to, Duke University gave me a special parking pass that allowed me to pretty much park. I got to park where the religious leaders of the school got to park. I got to park pretty much anywhere I wanted to park, right? So rather than damaging me, or like how come you're not, just go park where you're supposed to. No, they did not do that. So they took 2 courses off. They just dropped it, even though it happened after the normal drop ad period, and after normally you'd get a WF on your transcript, right? They took them off the transcript. So if you look at my college transcript, it looks like I never signed up for the classes, okay? And then 2 is I got into 2 car accidents right away, bang, bang. And after the second one, my parents just said, just get home. And I didn't take my finals until after that spring. So as I said, I was a professor of law for 12 years. What that means is those professors had to create a whole new final. That's a ton of work for them. But I never heard them complain. I never heard them, they were like, okay, and you can take your final when you're ready to take your final. So I didn't take them until I think it was like February or something. But I used to have to, where I lived, I had to walk through woods, was not happening. So they moved me into the major place where everybody wants to live. It's called Maine West. This is where all the best parties are. This is where all the fun stuff is, right? The waiting line is like this long, but they knew that like I needed to feel safe, and so they moved me on to Maine West. So, right, so I look at like, I got it from where I needed it. And then they let me not swim for a year. So I got to redshirt. So I didn't swim at all for a year. It was really hard for me to like let my mind not sort of, you know, go right into the terror. And in swimming, we always say that like you got to really be careful of what music that you're listening to right before practice, because otherwise, if you listen to a commercial, you're going to hear like, pop goes the weasel, right? It's 2 hours per practice, twice a day. And so like, you want to make sure like, you know, Brick House is playing or something, right? So that's what you're thinking of, or like, you know, some science lesson or whatever. So when I would like let my mind wander, right, I would be in big trouble. But it was my first 4.0 semester was because I had to keep like a tight rein on what I was thinking with, right, having to do this. So when I went back into swimming, I found that using the anger that I had, not that it did what therapists try to do all the time with students or with their patients is they try to get them to reenact it with a different result, right? Where the person's now more in control. Oh man, baby, did I do that? And my coach totally understood. And I used to cry in practice. So I'd be swimming, right? So swimming's about like this, okay? So, and the breathing is this and this, okay? So it's this and this, right? So it's pretty quick. You gotta, okay? So if you're crying, it's like, right? And then go, right? And he's like, you okay, Nance? I'm like, my goggles are filling up. But he was fine with it. It was just, you know, just go, right? And it turns out that now all this research on what does it take to recover from trauma is hard physical labor. I was just very lucky to be able to get. Richard Lapchick, who I know a lot of you all know here, he's a major sports ethicist. He and Harry Edwards and a lot of folks here all know him very well. But he was the one who said, you know, Nancy, I guess I'm 55 now. I know you're all shocked. But he was the one who, when I was about 40, who said, you know, like, you need to start telling the story. Because he's like, you are the 40-year-old that you wanted. Right? What you wanted was somebody like you. You wanted somebody like Brenda. You wanted somebody to come forward and say, you can sleep through the night. These crazy thoughts that you're having, for me anyway, it did end. I did get over it. I was really, really lucky, but you know, what I thought was at stake was that I was never going to get married. I thought what was at stake was, you know, I wasn't going to have a family and I wasn't going to have a professional career. I thought I was going to be thinking crazy thoughts all the time. I thought that I was going to be angry all the time. I thought that sort of love was going to be gone. Like I just, you know, I just couldn't imagine a future of like, what is a rape victim, what is their future? So I wanted a good one. and so he encouraged me, you know, to start talking about it. So for everybody out there everybody has a Me Too story, and how important that is for other people to understand, not just the most intimate people in your life, right? But to have more people broadly understand that what you think is at stake is not necessarily at stake, right? So you suffered terrible, terrible sexual assault and sexual abuse as a child, but you have a pretty good life, would you say?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm blessed, and I believe everything happens for a reason. So, I mean, part of how I am today is, you know, all of this trauma turned into a blessing of advocacy work and being able to help people. So when people ask me, would you go back and change anything? I can honestly say, no, I wouldn't change anything. Everything that has happened to me has turned me into the person that I am today. Right. And I have this amazing opportunity to act as a voice, not the voice. I don't try to speak for anyone, but I am an example of a voice of someone who has overcome and survived, and I am on a path of healing and redemption, and I hope that other survivors see that and think, I can do that too. So not just me too, as in I was also sexually assaulted, but me too, I'm also healing.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, great.
We should talk about men before we go.
Yeah, I was just going to go there. Yeah. So of course, Brenda just reminded me that we right. So we want to talk about like how is it that we get men to be part of this conversation? That it's not a women's issue, right? Jackson Katz does this great work showing how that we tend to talk about violence against women erases the word men from the conversation. Yes. So how do we? Most men are not rapists. Right? Most men do not commit sexual harassment or sexual assault.
Right.
So how do we have their voices be louder than the bad guys? Right? So what do you think?
So initially when I started doing this work, I initially knew that I wanted to work with men. Men were my passion. I just instinctively knew this was not a women's issue. And so I travel the country and I work with men and mainly athletes a lot because of their influence. But I think for me, it's really about talking to our men in positive terms and not just negative terms. A lot of times we talk to them as though they're just the problem. We don't talk to them as they're the solution. We talk about what not to do. We don't talk about what you can do. So we talk about stop raping, stop being a rapist, we do things like, and no offense, but we bring lawyers in, we bring Title IX in, we bring all these people in. And it's kind of, the tone is kind of, well, we think you're probably going to commit rape, so we're going to tell you what's going to happen to you when you do. Instead of talking to men as the solution, and that's what I do. I literally go into these team rooms and I say, guys, listen to me carefully. I'm not here because I think you're the problem. I'm here because I know that you're the solution. And then I tell them why, and I will tell you all why I know that men are the solution. Number one, if women can stop sexual violence, we would have already done it. Number two, well over 90%, probably 98% of all sexual violence is carried out by men. Men are perpetrating these crimes. They're perpetrating against other men and women and children. But it's only about 10% of our population of men that are doing this, which means 90% of our guys are good. And that's who I go to talk to. I go to talk to the 90%. The problem is that in that 90%, there's men thinking, well, I don't do this. Why is this my problem? Or they're silent. And here's the thing. If women can't stop sexual violence, do we think the 10% of the men committing these crimes are going to do it? Can we count on them to change the culture? No. Who does that leave? It leaves the 90%. This is why it's a men's issue. This is why it's the men's problem. This is why the 90% of the guys who aren't doing these things need to get involved. And that's who I talk to. And I ask them to have conversations with each other, right? I know that I can check a man or say something to him, but it's probably not going to mean as much to him as another man that he respects. So I ask them to have conversations with each other. Let's talk about locker room talk. Let's talk about the fact that men are survivors too. And many times there's survivors in the room when I'm there. Let's talk about that it's okay to respect women. Let's talk about all of those things and stand up. Don't be silent. See something, say something. Be active. Be part of the solution. Align yourself with women like me and Nancy and other amazing organizations and figuring out how do we push back on the 10% that are committing these crimes against humanity. It's all of us that we have to work together. It's not a divisive issue for me. The only way it's divisive for me is, are you the 10% or the 90%? That's the only divisiveness there is for me. Right. It's not about all women lie, all men are rapists, whatever it is the media feeds us, but it's about working together. And so, yeah, for me, men are the X factor, and so that's what I do. It's kind of weird for me sometimes, right? Because I was raped by college football players, and now I work with college football players, but it's also very gratifying. I think and there's a whole bunch of the solution up here.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
all these young men up here.
There you go.
Right?
There you go.
They're the 90%.
So do you have any personal reaction, like, when Dr. Edwards used his privilege and his academic expertise to make the case, like, what was that like just as a woman to be listening to him?
It's therapeutic for me. It's healing. It's empowering. It's everything for me to see men stand there and be vulnerable enough to kind of buck the system of what we say manhood is and what we say masculinity is, and say, I'm part of that 90%, and I'm going to align myself with women, and I'm strong enough in my manliness and my manhood to know that this is okay and this is the right way. Because when one man stands up, he gives permission to another man to stand up, and another man, and another man, and another man, and that's how you change a culture.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, it's so great when you see a guy do that, and there's so many things that, frankly, men can say that that women just can't say, right, without being like, oh, come on, right? So for him to be able to do it, right, it gives
And
all...
it's about the power structure, right?
Exactly, right.
I tell people all the time, like, asking women to end sexual violence is like asking children to end child abuse.
Right, right.
It makes no sense.
Yeah.
Women are not in the position of power in this scenario to be able to dismantle this.
Right.
We can help, support, be part of the change, but we need men to get involved.
Right.
We need the creators of this construct of sexism to dismantle it.
Just like we need straight people to be supportive of our LGBT allies. Right. Just like we need,
white
when
people,
I say LGBT...
Racism. Right. Look at the power structure. Look at the power dynamic.
Exactly, right.
And you can figure out where we need to start.
Right. So speak out on behalf of those that you know don't have the platform to be able to speak out on behalf of.
Right.
So, and I think that's the great thing that Set the Expectation does in signing a pledge, is it gives the guys a platform to be able to, in the language really, to be able to be part of the 90% good guys.
Yeah. And very quickly, I just want to interject this when we're talking about privilege and things. I think, one of the things as a survivor for me is I want to use my privilege too, as a white female survivor who has gotten press coverage and things, to hopefully make space and create a place where LGBTQ, men, people of color, all of these people who are being ignored and dismissed in this space too, have space to have their voices heard too in their stories.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a real privilege for me to be able to be up here with Brenda Tracy. Thank you all very much for being here with us, and thanks to everybody, particularly who's up there. We got the lights on us. It's kind of hard for us to see you, but we're really grateful that you're here. So, ladies and gentlemen, one more time, Brenda Tracy.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. It was good. Thank you for everything.
Well, thank you. You too.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our moderator for Panel 2, San Francisco 49ers General Counsel and former NFL Manager of Labor Operations, Hannah Gordon.
Hello. That was powerful. So we're going to be your last panel today, which makes this like the 7th inning stretch. I work in football. I hope this is a good sports analogy in baseball. So I'm going to have you all stand up for 1 second and actually stretch, because I know you've been sitting for a minute. I know that was a lot to take in. And I see a couple people here from the 49ers, both men and women, some of whom we do yoga together. So I'm also going to have you take a big, deep inhale and a big exhale. Yeah, because that was really, really powerful. You guys can sit down when you're ready. And I also want to make sure that we thank one more time the San Jose State football team, these young men who are so courageous to be here today and participate in this conversation and to meet with Brenda yesterday. So our last panel today is going to be opportunity and empowerment. So all of our panelists, I've heard them all speak individually, so I know that you're in for a treat because they're really amazing. And we were talking beforehand about how we're here at the end because we really do stand on the shoulders of the women who are on this first panel. So please join me in welcoming first a woman who I'm so proud to call my coworker, Coach Katie Sowers of the San Francisco 49ers, one of the very few women coaches in the NFL and the first openly gay coach in the NFL. Next is Danielle Slayton, an Olympic silver medalist and sideline reporter for the San Jose Earthquakes. Karen Brodkin, Executive Vice President at Endeavor and former Fox Sports Media Group executive. And two-time Olympic gold medalist and WNBA Hall of Famer Ruthie Bolton. So I was wondering first if each of you would just share with us your journeys to where you've gotten today. We heard from the women earlier, the women who are pre-Title IX. If you could just kind of tell us what was your journey and where are you now?
Wow, thank you. It's been an awesome day. I'm excited to be here with so many awesome women, and today I'm very proud to be a woman for sure. But definitely. Well, I came from a family of 20, 11 sisters and 8 brothers, and I grew up in Mississippi, and basketball was sort of the sports where at least 10 could play, so that was a sport that we all played. And so yeah, I had I played behind my sister that was really, really good, and I wasn't really that good. And so I had to go through a lot of challenges and a lot of disappointments, but I was blessed to get the opportunity to play at Auburn University and play basketball there, and then I went on to play overseas for 8 years, and I played in the WNBA, and basketball has really been great, being able to represent our country in 2 Olympics, 96 and 2000 has been one of the most amazing experiences I've had with basketball, and I'm just thankful to be where I am today. I do a lot of mentoring and encouraging girls and really trying to use my platform in basketball as an opportunity to really reach out to girls, because there's a quote that I love, is that to the world, you might be one person, but to one person, you could be the world. And every day I wake up, how can I impact? How can I use basketball as a platform to empower young girls? So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
So I feel like I'm the obligatory non-athlete on every one of these panels. I did play tennis in high school competitively, and I was a cheerleader. But I've been on the business side of sports almost my entire career. I should start off by saying this is a pinnacle in my career because I was a student of Dr. Edwards at Berkeley, and he changed my life and made me want to work in sports. So if I ever thought that I would be invited to speak at something he would speak at, I would never have believed it. So thank you, San Jose State and the Institute, for making a dream come true for me today. I started as a lawyer, and my first job in sports, which was a dream job for me, was to join Fox Sports. I worked up the food chain there pretty quickly, and when I left after 15 years, I ran business affairs across all of their domestic sports assets. So all of their TV, their radio, digital. And then 3+ years ago, I was invited to leave the law, which I'm going to say as a woman lawyer is not that easy to do, to get the opportunity to move into a real business strategy, business development role. That to me was my biggest gender challenge, was to get men who were running those companies to see me in a different role that was really strategic. Instead of implementing somebody else's strategy, was to set strategy. I was very fortunate to join a company where we are the ultimate meritocracy. So if you perform, you are rewarded, and I work for, frankly, men who see that and push that every day, and was given the opportunity to join what is now called Endeavor. The original name of the company was William Morris Endeavor. They bought a company called IMG, which is a global sports agency, and I run biz dev and strategy across this company globally, and I mean, it really is, it's a dream.
That's fantastic.
So I'm local. I grew up here, right in East San Jose, about 10 minutes from here. My background is in soccer. I started playing soccer because at 5 years old, I was breaking stuff around my parents' house, and soccer started on Tuesday, and that's how I started. Fortunate, a little bit like a lot of these women and the women you heard from in the first panel, a little bit lucky, right place, right time, but also working hard at the right place and the right time. And I was really fortunate to grow up in an era where soccer was just absolutely booming in this country, and scholarships were becoming more readily available. The first Olympics for women's soccer was in 1996, when I was 16 years old, so really starting to see the pioneers of my sport being, real people that you could see on television. Got to play soccer at Santa Clara University, where I started to get some recognition by the women's national team, and all of a sudden at 19, the women who were the posters on my wall, I was now trying to defend, poorly, by the way, at the time. But still surviving and hanging on. When I finished my career due to injury, I got into coaching, so coached at Northwestern University, where the Big Ten Network was just starting at the time as the first college network. And when I stopped coaching, got into television, again, right place, right time. Somebody saying, hey, we need somebody to talk about soccer on television. Can you do that? Yes, I can. Had no idea what I was doing. But again, soccer continued to grow in this country. The television coverage on the men's and women's sides continues to grow. And so I get to keep my toes in the game in that capacity by participating on the sideline and in the booth. And then my full-time real job is working at Santa Clara University within the School of Education. So getting to stay involved in the community and make an impact on the education side as well.
Well, I did not grow up around here. I grew up in Kansas, and if you guys are thinking, oh, you're not in Kansas anymore, if you guys even knew how many times I heard that joke, it's not funny anymore, so when you guys hear someone say that, forget it, it's over, it's old. So I grew up in a small town, 2 stoplights, about 3,000 people in my town. I loved football when I was really little. I mean, my dad was a collegiate basketball coach. He didn't play football, so I don't know where I got my love for, and secretly, don't tell anyone this, I love the Cowboys. I'm so sorry. But that was, I heard some clapping. But I don't love them anymore. Yeah. So I grew up, and I remember my very favorite Christmas. My dad, he worked at a college, and I mean, maybe he was being cheap, but he got some old football pads and helmets from the school that he worked at and gave it to me for my Christmas gift, and it was the best. I was ripping it open, and oh my gosh, this stinky helmet they were gonna throw away. And I would play football in the backyard with all the boys, and I remember the day that my best friend, Aaron Billings, he came home with his school football helmet and jersey, and I remember just the feeling of such sadness, and I had all these journal entries that, I would write about football, and football is my favorite sport. My mom doesn't want me to play football, but I want to play football, but I guess I'll play basketball. Basketball's okay, but I'd rather play football. So, but I didn't think it was an option for me. So continued on playing basketball, played a number of different sports in college, and at that point, since my dad was a coach, I knew I wanted to coach. I knew that was, something I wanted to do. And so I decided after, I was taking a victory lap in college. That's what I call it. If you take a 5th year, it's a little victory lap. It's fine. So our basketball team needed a little help, and so I was reached out. I went to a small Christian college, and I reached out to my coach. Hey, can I volunteer for free? And he's like, let's come in and talk about this. I want to volunteer and coach, so let's talk about this. So I came in, and he told me, this is nothing personal, but because of your lifestyle, I was openly a lesbian. We got rid of all that, so we don't want you around the team. And I remember leaving there, and I was in tears because I was a captain of the basketball team. It's not like I was just some bad person. I was a captain of the team, and then now, it's nothing personal. So my dream of being coach just felt that much further out of reach. And to this day, I continue to say I'm going to write him a note, and I keep saying I'm going to do it, but I'm going to write him a thank you note, because for that moment that I was rejected and I was turned down, I don't think I would be here as an NFL coach. So, because I started to search for something different, and I came back to my very first love, which was football. I found women's tackle football. I played football for 8 years, started in a team in Michigan and played in Kansas City. I was a member of the 2013 USA Women's National Football Team, where we won a gold medal. And a lot of times people are like, oh, you lingerie football? Nope, it's, we play actually with NCAA rules. And so, we talk about these experiences happen, and it's the right place at the right time.
I was working and I decided I'm going to coach 6th grade girls basketball. And then they messed up the schedule. And right when we were getting ready to start, they're like, we're so sorry. Can you coach 5th grade girls basketball? Because we just messed everything up. I'm like, that's fine. It ended up that I coached the daughter of a former general manager for the Kansas City Chiefs, Scott Pioli, who we built a relationship. He learned about my passion for football, my experience playing, my experience coaching, and he then became the assistant general manager for the Falcons and a mentor for me. And so if it wasn't for a lot of those moments being rejected, being turned down, mix-ups in schedules, like those are the things that set your path. And so that's, I mean, really my path is here, and I think anyone here can probably somewhat relate that we're all here because of some path that maybe was least expected. So today, I got to know the Atlanta Falcons coaching staff. Kyle Shanahan was the offensive coordinator there, now our head coach here, and he brought me along with him, so here I am.
I want to follow up on something that Ruthie said about using her platform. And I want to ask all of you, and it doesn't have to be in any particular order, what is the role of women in sport, whether it's in coaching or business or as an athlete, in promoting social change in our society?
I think that my role every day, and like I said, I've written 2 books, The Ride of a Lifetime and From Pain to Power, and I'm actually have a girls' class right now that I'm missing. I sent them pictures. I said, I'm at something important. That's why I'm missing. But I think that we have a huge role. We have the stories. They need to hear stories. The good stories, they need to hear the bad stories, because all of it really empowers young girls. And I get a lot of letters from parents and saying, thank you for encouraging my daughter. Thank you for spending time with her. And to me, that's is the biggest 3-point play, to be able to use my struggle, to be able to use that. I dealt with rejection. I dealt with disappointment. But they need to hear that, because a lot of girls are hearing that. A lot of girls are quitting because I don't know how to deal with that pain. So we need to remind these girls that you can turn your pain to power and use our stories to impact them. And as much as I love playing the game, and like I said, I'm always ready for a game, but one of the biggest exciting games is to be able to really impact these young ladies, and it's so empowering. So definitely I think that we all have a responsibility, and I feel like every day I get up, like, how can I make someone else's life better, especially these young ladies? So to me, I think it's very important.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I would say is I feel like my role for women and other diverse individuals, because I do not think it's just a gender issue, is to kind of show them that there's no shortcut. At least there really was no shortcut for me. It's hard work and it's experience, and you have to sort of walk before you run. I think that's really important. One thing that I do think is true about women in business and individuals of color in business is you're not allowed to make a lot of mistakes. And what I do see a lot of happening in the business of sports with men is they fail up or they fail lateral. They will have a job, they will ultimately lose their job, and they will get hired again and again and again. And I don't see that happening for women and for men of color. I don't think you get as many chances. So I feel like part of my role as a woman who works in the business of sport is to really help mentor by explaining the hard work, the experience, what you have to do to get there. The worst thing that I think that can happen in a company is for there to be this reaction, we have to have diversity, and then they start throwing people at jobs that they are not ready for, or they haven't gone down the path to get there, because then when they don't succeed, it will be, see, I told you so, or it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I feel like that's a little bit of my role. I also think, listening to last panel, it is really important to recognize, acknowledge, and champion the men who are championing women and diversity. And that's why I raised the topic of the men that I work for and saw something in me, because they champion me every day. And I don't sit here today if I'm not championed by men somewhere in my career. It doesn't happen for a woman at my level and my age. And then the final thing I would just say is I'm the mother of a 10-year-old son who's very sporty. And my job with him is to show him that this is the new norm. And he and I went to see Black Panther the day it opened. And I was struck after the movie. We went out to eat, and it never occurred to him to question that the most powerful, the army in the movie, were black women. I mean, that's amazing. It wasn't even an issue. It was just accepted as the norm. So I feel like my responsibility is to set the new norm with my son and his kids going forward. This has to be the new norm.
Yeah. How do you follow that? Yes. Ditto to what she said. I would say, you know, like when you ask what role athletes have in our platform, like to me, it's hands down they have to be the leaders in this area. I look at the USA women's hockey team, I look at the US women's soccer team, like they have a platform that doctors and educators and all of these women who are fighting this exact same fight, but in a less televised manner, like it's the same fight, but they just have the platform to do it. So absolutely, as athletes, elite athletes need to be the leaders in this area for me. Yes, we have governance. Yes, we have, you know, moms educating. We all have our own platforms in a certain way, but absolutely, they have the biggest Twitter followers. They have the biggest megaphone. Like, it absolutely needs to happen. And I think to your point in terms of having men, you know, really champion and be advocates in this area is hugely important. I have a producer that I work with at Fox, and he says, it is my mission to get you to be an analyst on a national broadcast in Major League Soccer. It is my mission to do that. And I don't know how it's gonna happen. I don't know how we're gonna make it happen, but we're gonna find a way to make it happen. And it takes people like that in positions of power, which way we need more women in positions of power, more people of color in positions of power, because those are the gatekeepers and the people who make it so I get to have a voice on television talking about soccer, and it's not because of how I look, it's because of the words that are coming out of my mouth that add value to the conversation in a new and unique perspective and way. So I think that's hugely important, and it's my job then to turn around and say, okay, I'm up the ladder, girl, you're coming with me too.
Yeah, that's right. And I would add as well, the way that I kind of look at social change in the game is I think we sometimes forget the way that our gender norms and the way society views being a woman limits the opportunities that we're giving our children. I was walking one time through the store with my niece, and I was letting her pick out a toy for her birthday, and she couldn't find what she wanted. I was like, you want to go down this aisle? She's like, no, that's the boy aisle. I'm like, boy aisle? Yeah. And you guys all know what I'm talking about, the cool stuff, the Legos, you know, at least that's what I thought. And she didn't want to go down the aisle, and after we basically walked through the whole store, we went back to that aisle. I was like, you want to try this aisle again? She found exactly what she wanted. And if you look at that in the aspect of life, how many aisles are we missing if we're teaching our children that that's for boys and this is for girls? And so social change, I think, can come. I mean, you drive through McDonald's and you order a Happy Meal and they ask you if it's a boy or a girl because they somehow feel like they now have a better understanding of what your child likes. And to me, we're limiting our opportunities for our children, and we're subconsciously telling our girls that they get this and boys get that. And I think the more that we can continue to change that mindset, we're allowing people to find their passion. We're allowing women and men to pursue something that's bigger than themselves and actually, ultimately makes them happy.
That's awesome. So the point that Karen made and that Dr. Edwards made earlier about intersectionality, what do you see as the best way for us to make sure that the conversation about gender also looks at the differences between our experiences? And my experience as a white heterosexual woman is not the same experience that Katie has had, is not the same experience that Danielle has had. How do we advance that conversation and make sure that that stays a part of, when we talk about gender parity, that there isn't just one way of being a female, that there isn't just one experience that's happening here?
I think we get all different kinds of people in the room and we start talking. I mean, and I think to me, this is a little bit the challenge of social media and the way things are moving is, right? Like I'm only fed the information that aligns with what I believe. And so I'm not as attuned to someone who is very different and would spend a lifetime advocating for something that I would spend a lifetime arguing against. We don't get in the room. We don't hear those conversations. And so, I mean, we all have the shared similar experience of being women, but we also have very different experiences too. And so I think maybe we start with, hey, we're all women. Let's get in the conversation. Let's get in the room. Let's create forums like this. Let's not just talk about it. Let's figure out the small little things that we can do to make headway and to increase this conversation. So then we can all kind of come together and pick and choose the areas that we want to try to tackle.
Yeah, and I think it's really important in every aspect of business, sport, I mean, anything, that you really get to know people who are different than you. And I think we're so just comfortable with talking to people who are just like us. And the more that we get to know and we can put a face to, you know, that, oh, well, I've never met a lesbian before. Well, you get to know somebody, and you probably do know, you know, and it's that conversation that you start to recognize and you see the strengths of our differences. And, you know, you look at football, there's so many different types of people that create a successful team, and that's one cool thing about the sport, more so than any sport that I've played. You need the really big people, you need the really small people, I mean, you need the fast people, you need every different type to make it successful. And it's the differences that make that team work, and I think it's the same with life and what we're talking about right here.
So we're all in this room because we're all woke already, right? So how do we get the rest of the world into that conversation, do you think?
Look, someone said it. I mean, ultimately, I am ultimately a believer that it needs to, at some point, start at the top of the, you know, I work in business, so I'm going to speak to the business world. Until there are more women and people of color at the top of those companies, there will only be incremental change. So I'm just a very big believer. I mean, I took a pen to Sheryl Sandberg's book when it came out. I underlined the passages that said, you know, like when a woman and a man are applying for a job, if a man meets 6 of the 10 assets, he says, I got this job, it's mine. And if a woman meets 6 of the 10, she goes, well, I'm not gonna apply, I'm not qualified. I mean, I keep those things in mind every day, but part of her thesis was until there is change at the top, the change can only be incremental. So I think the larger conversation is it's not going to happen overnight. It is a process. There needs to be more diversity on public company boards. There needs to be more diversity in the C-suites of companies, including those that work in sports. I mean, I think it's very interesting that you read articles about Robert Iger, who's the president of Disney, is going to eventually retire in the next couple of years, and when they talk about his successors, they really don't talk about very many female minority candidates as the possible successor to Bob Iger, the president of Disney. That is a really important position in the business community. And I want to get to the point where there are more women and people of color that are in conversation for those jobs. But I do think it's a process, and you have to take baby steps before you can run. And you know, that's sort of my hypothesis: is you keep the conversation going, you acknowledge that it's steps. I mean, look, to the point of, you know, all women are just not alike. We don't all think alike. I don't want to get political, but I can tell you there's some women in the White House that do not speak for me, okay? Just because they're women. So you have to acknowledge that in this conversation, just like all men, you know, men are different, women are different. There's a different voice, and it's just going to take time.
Yeah, I agree. I think that like words to action, I think we have to continue the conversation. And like I said, there's a process, and there's a quote that I love. It said, we want to fly, but if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. And if you can't walk, crawl, as long as you keep moving. So I think if we keep talking about it, and I feel like there's enough powerful women here today to keep this thing moving. There's a lot of trailblazers here, so we have really no excuse now. They keep moving it forward, keep talking about it, keep the conversation going, because obviously I think that we've come a long way. We have a long way to go, but we have power in this room, and I think from here on it's going to be, we're going to a new level. I feel it.
Love it. As you talk about that, Ruthie, can you share a little bit more about your personal story, kind of empowerment, and what you would kind of say to, if there are young women in the audience who maybe are like, well, I don't know if I can do what you can do.
Wow, man. My story, I'll try to give a synopsis. You know, I grew up in the country, and the illustration that described my story is that, you know, we used to jump fences and climb trees, and this one particular fence, I have jumped it before, but that particular day, it was hard for me to get over that fence. And as I run up to the fence, it seemed like it got higher and higher. Fear set in. And I could see my siblings just leaving me saying, come on, don't worry about it. I'm like, no, I want to get over this fence. And I remember I tried it again, and I still couldn't get over it. And the street light came on. Back in Mississippi, when that light came on, you only had 5 minutes to be in the house. So I couldn't accomplish that day. That night, I felt so unaccomplished. I was like, I got to get over that fence. And I remember the next day, before anybody else got up, I went out, me and that fence. I said, I can jump this fence. I know I can. And I remember running, and I got to the fence. I think I closed my eyes. I leaped. I jumped over the fence. I didn't quite land on my feet, but I landed. I celebrated that moment. That moment, I was about 14 to 15 years old. There was no cameras there. ESPN wasn't there. The USA Committee wasn't there. The Olympic Committee wasn't there. The Hall of Fame Committee wasn't there. That moment meant something to me. And I was 14 or 15. I believe that's the moment I started becoming an Olympian. I didn't know it, but that moment started the process of me embracing my fears, embracing setbacks, because I had a lot of them. I didn't get recruited out of high school. I had to ride a bus, 10 hours, only school. They gave me a chance. They say I wouldn't play in my junior, senior year. You know, as an 18-year-old, I was like, I didn't really have the confidence at the time. I'm like, man, I wasn't quite there. My dad encouraged me. He said, daughter, and most of the time he called me daughter because he couldn't remember my name. He said, daughter, you can't give your power away. If you don't get on that bus, okay, yes, you got to ride a bus 10 hours, but you know what? Life is 10% of what happens to you and 9% how you respond to it. Like, okay, Dad, yeah, that sounds great on paper, but it's like, in real life, it's like, what do I do? This school, I feel like they don't really want me. He said, well, you'll never know if you don't get on that bus. I got on that bus, went to Auburn, and the coach said, yeah, he said, man, we can't believe you're here. You know, we didn't call you because we didn't think you were good enough to play here. You called us, and so we told you that, okay, you can get on the bus, it takes 10 hours, and you still came. He said, either you're a woman of faith or you're a little bit crazy. But you're down the bus. He said, you're here, but you can't play your senior year. What do you think that felt like? I felt like saying, you know what, talk to the hand. I don't want to do this. My dad said, listen, you go to Auburn. Even if you don't make one basket, you'll get a free education because they honor the scholarship. So anyway, to make a long story short, I ended up playing. I started my freshman year. This coach said I want to play in my senior. So when we went to the regional, I sat right by the coach, and he said, can you believe I didn't want the young lady? And I was saying to myself, I should say I told you so. But I didn't. But that really, getting over that fence gave me confidence, getting on that bus. So that really just that really gave me confidence, all those struggles I went through to really become the person I am today. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do, and I feel compelled to share with young girls, because I didn't wake up and was All-American. I didn't wake up and was a superstar. I had to fight at every crossroad. One more. Even after college, I wanted to play for the national team. I didn't get invited. You know, I'm like, you kidding me? We made it to the final game. This is March Madness month. We made it to the final game, and I'm not good enough to make the top 50. But once again, that door closed with that window of opportunity. I got through that window. I had to pay my own way to go. Many people said, don't do it. They don't really want you. And so my dad said, you know what? Do it. You'll always wonder what if. Paid my own way to go to Colorado Springs. After 3 days, 9 sessions, they gave this big speech, 175 girls. They only have 24 spots. They said, thank you all for coming. If you made it, your name would be highlighted outside on the door. If you didn't, good luck with the rest of your career. So I sat there not knowing the results. But sure enough, I stood up, went outside, and I saw my name, Alice Ruth Bolton. That's the only name I saw. I was like, wow, look what happens when hard work, a positive attitude, and resilience. And so to me, that reminded me, because the year later, I was USA Player of the Year. The story go on and on. But that's why I feel so compelled to young girls, because I've been where you are. I've been at a place where I didn't know whether to go left or right. So sharing my story of triumph, sharing my story of resilience and determination, I feel like I'm indebted to these young ladies, because I know that these young ladies have doubt. So every day I wake up, how can I help some young lady say, you know what, if I did it, you can do it too, because circumstances said no. But my attitude and my work ethic says yes. Yeah.
So now I want to know, Katie, Danielle, Karen, what was your jumping the fence moment? What was a moment that either you had to overcome, or where you were just like, damn, I feel powerful? Like, I got this?
I mean, this is it. So when I went to Santa Clara University, and it was my freshman year, and it was one of our first training sessions, and we were doing a defending drill, and I was a defender. And a little bit in this drill is a little bit like golf, where you want to get the lowest score possible, right? So you want to get birdie, eagle, whatever. So the whole team was doing it, and I think my score was like positive 13. I mean, it was bad. Like, even the forwards were kicking my butt. And this was one of the first days of training, and I remember I called my parents, and I was like, I think I made the wrong decision. I can't do this. It's like, even the forwards were beating me in a defending drill. And so I remember it was, a really tough kind of just transition that I think a lot of people go through, at different phases of their life. But I remember I, got a little pep talk from my parents, and they said, all right. And it was a small moment, but I think that was a little bit of the moment too, where that was the first year where I got to play on the national team then. And there was just small little moments, as silly as it can be, like a tackle here, a choice there, right? A schedule change here that really can set the trajectory that's different and sets you on a certain path. And so for me, that was just a small thing, but I think a moment that I kind of look back to every now and then.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's the same thing. So it's all these little things in life, that I've talked about before. One moment, though, that I think really catapulted my work ethic. So I'm a twin, and I don't know if we have any twins here.
I'm twin.
But no wonder.
We're 20.
Winning is winning. Anyway, so I'm a twin, and as a twin, you're constantly compared. It's just something that you get used to. It's you don't like it, but you're constantly in competition, or it's pretty obvious the differences. And I don't know if you guys have ever felt that compared, but it's a pretty unique experience. And so when I was playing basketball in high school, my twin sister, she started playing on the varsity team, and I was playing on the freshman team. And not because she was better, she just played a different position. So, and they needed me on the freshman team. That's really what it was. So, and I remember she was getting all these newspapers calling her, and one day they got me out of class, which I don't know how this happened in high school. They're like, oh, the newspaper wants to talk to you. I'm like, me? Never. Are you sure? It's me? Not okay, me. Okay, great. So got on the phone, and they were like, hi, Katie. We're doing this article about twins and the twin that's in the shadow, and we just want to talk to you about, this is my first interview. We want to talk about what it's like to be in your sister's shadow.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, well, I didn't feel like I was in their shadow till now, but great. I thought I was leading the freshman team. They had plays named after me. I was proud of that. I was her biggest fan. But I remember, taking it in stride and just realizing that there's always going to be obstacles. There's always going to be things that might not go your way or the way you want it to, but it's part of your story, and it's something that you need to be proud of. I'm proud that I played freshman basketball while my twin sister. I'm telling you, when she brought home her varsity jersey, I was trying it on, looking in the mirror. I was so proud of her, and it's not something that I would ever take back. So everything that happens in your life is just a building block to where you're meant to be. And so I think that in itself created my work ethic, just striving to be better.
All right, so I'll give you a sports allegory. So like I said, I did play tennis growing up, and my dad was an athlete and played, baseball in college World Series, and he was a very good tennis player. And I didn't grow up in a family where when you turned 16 or 17, you automatically got a car. It was just, you didn't need a car. You have friends that drive, you can drive with them. So my dad says to me when I turned 14, if you beat me in one set of tennis, and we'll play as many matches as you want, I'll get you a car, any car you want. Which at the time I thought, oh my gosh, he's gonna get me any car I want. Little did I know that there was no chance I was ever gonna beat him. But he would taunt me, you want a convertible, you want this. And my dad and I, over the course of 3.5 years,
played no less than 250 sets of tennis. I never beat him. I bought my first car with my own money. But I will tell you that I do think about that. And I mean, you know, I look back and I think my dad was so right to do that to me. He knew that that was going to motivate me, and it does. So I will tell you that I don't take anything for granted. I am grateful, but I'm not a big believer in luck. I mean, we can all be super grateful for what we have, but we didn't get here because of luck. So I work hard, I persevere. It started from the time I was 14 and never beat him in tennis, and I think about that all the time. I mean, that was probably my aha moment, and didn't even realize it, but it has sort of continued with me throughout my entire life. Like, I don't want to get beaten down in any negotiation. I will tell you, I work a lot with Serena Williams now. I'm really fortunate. She's one of our clients, and I'm on Team Serena. And while
I think we're all on Team Serena.
Yeah, I mean, you guys, she is a spectacular human being, and I'm so this one I am lucky to be working with her. But so obviously, Serena as a tennis player, Karen as a business professional, I really connect with her because I will kill myself to make opportunities for Serena, because that's what I can do for her. She's a beast on that tennis court, and I'm going to be a beast when I'm trying to do a deal for her. And we connect in that way. And I would have liked to have had her on my side of the court against my dad, let me tell you.
He'd be driving a Maserati if that was the case. I want to come back to something Dr. Edwards said earlier about body image and women athletes, just sort of your existence being defiance in a way. And I wanted to ask, what were, you know, all of you played at different levels. What experience did you have with having to either defend who you are or have people say something about the way that you look, et cetera, and how did you overcome that?
You know, people always say, I know I sort of carry a lot of muscles in my arm a little bit, but they're not tattooed. But you know, I think a lot of young girls sometimes, you know, even talk about looking a certain way. And I think that, to me, you know, I don't know if anybody's seen, but I lived 10 years in domestic violence, and ESPN did a documentary on my life story. And actually, during that time when I felt this small, you know what would sustain me is that I could work out. You know, I went running, I would go to weights, and I could do 15 pull-ups. And when I was in the military, you know, I would just dominate the guys when I did physical things. So that sustained me, because I did live a life where I didn't quite, you know, love myself, and I felt this small. But what helped me during that time was being able to feel strong physically. When I had to do pull-ups, and I felt like, you know what, I could do this, I can conquer. So I think that the image, you know, I think that we need to change the image of these young ladies. You know, it's about feeling confident, and it's not about, you know, what it looks. And there's so much more we can worry about than what it looks like. And so I think that we have to continue to remind them that it's okay to feel strong, it's okay to look strong. And those things are so minor. And when people create those conversations, it's very immature conversations, but it's about, you know, how do you feel on the inside? If you're strong, you're strong. Because some girls, I don't want to do too many weight because I don't want to look too strong like a man. To me, it's very negative, you know, perception. But to me, I feel strong and I got muscles and nothing you can do about it. And stuff.
I mean, I feel like I should pass off. I mean, the only thing I'd say as a woman in business, I mean, I'm not very tall. And that has not been great for me. Being a shorter woman working around men, it has its own challenges. I think you have to visualize yourself internally differently than you look. And I'm also just going to say, for the record, and I don't know if this was your experience as a young lawyer, a lot of the senior women that I worked around were probably the worst offenders of giving me advice as a woman. I had a senior partner at my first law firm call me in to give me advice, and I was so excited. I brought in a pad of paper. I'm going to get like all the tips of the trade. And she said, okay, Karen, when you go to court, you need to pull your hair back in a ponytail because no judge wants to see your hair down, and never wear red nail polish. I thought, oh, I've like fallen through the looking glass. Like, this is my tips of the trade. So I will say, I mean, that's off topic, but for me,
It's not off topic.
I mean,
No.
for me, I have to sometimes step in a room and visualize myself being sort of tall and statuesque and powerful, and, you know, believe it internally. But again, these guys are a lot more able to respond to that question than
No,
me.
but I think it's still a very valid point that we all deal with a different sort of body image issues or people projecting on us based on height or size, or are we big enough or strong enough?
You can also see that I didn't listen because I don't hair my hair back in a
It
ponytail.
looks good, girl. It looks good. No, I mean, but I think that this conversation around valuing the way women look, right? Like that's a big thing. And when I speak with little girls and I talk, I mean, I tell them all of the time there is nothing weak about being strong. And somehow I feel like that message is you can't be too strong because then you look like a man, and somehow that makes you not right. Or no, like strength of body, strength of mind, strength of spirit, like all of those things need to be cultivated in women and girls. And the more that we can remind them that strong is beautiful and that you are valued for all of you, not just the way you look, but you are valued for much, much more than that. I think that's the message that we want to convey. But like, to Karen's point, I mean, there are still superficial things that come to the surface all of the time. I mean, I've asked for feedback in the television world, and I've gotten, oh, well, you should wear your hair straight, or you should wear your hair curly. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I should have been more specific in my question. Can you give me feedback about what I said, not about how I looked? Like, and, you know, so we do have those little fights to continue, but the bigger issue, I think, is the messaging that we continue to tell to young women and young girls of like being who you are, fully who you are, with the way you look and the way you act and the choices you make are important, and just as important as any man.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think tying into that, I always like to revert back to football, no matter what it is. But you know, this idea that we got to keep men masculine, we're scared of men being feminine. We got to keep women feminine because we're scared of them being masculine. You think of football, one of the most masculine, what I would say one of the last sports that we socially reserve for men. Because if you think about it, it's everything that we're scared about with being a woman. Like, you know, you think of what's a woman? Oh, they're passive, they're weak, men are strong and assertive and everything that you would think of a football team, right? And so we have these categories, and if a guy, you know, if a man is playing football and he misses a tackle, oh, you hit like a girl, right? Because we're scared of being like a girl, and when in reality we have to break down those barriers and start to, as a society, understand that like a girl can be really, really great. And you know, I always love when they say like, oh, you run like a girl. Well, if you ran a little faster, you could too. And so, you know, we just change the mindset that women are not a certain way and men are not a certain way. And it's okay for men to be emotional. It's okay for them to open up about their feelings. It's okay for a woman to be strong. It's okay for a lawyer to come in looking feminine, because being a lawyer has been in the past reserved for, it's a male-dominated industry. So when you come in and, oh, you're looking feminine, you're not going to be as good at your job, right? That's the mindset. And so if we break down that mindset and we just let people be what they want to be and who they are, we're all going to be better.
Amen. I think you make a great point there, that equity liberates everyone. Equity liberates men as much as it liberates women.
Absolutely.
And so for our final question, I want to ask each of you if you would share with the audience if there's a young man or young woman who wants to be a coach or be on television or work behind the scenes in television and business or be a speaker and an athlete and an Olympian, what would be your advice for them? Somebody wants to be like
I can start since I feel like I've ended everything. But, I apologize. So my advice is pretty simple. I think on your journey to get wherever you want to go, you have to first believe that it can happen. And yeah, that's great. Oh, believe it. I know it's harder than just thinking about that. But while you're on your journey to where you want to go, do your job to the best of your ability. And if your job is taking out the trash, you better be the best bleep person at taking out the trash because, first of all, you never know who's watching, and you're never too good to do something like that. I remember one of my first jobs, I wasn't supposed to, I was working in a gym and I was cleaning the athletic equipment and someone walked by me and said, "That's not your job." And I said, "This is everybody's job because this is who we are." And on the side, sometimes I walk dogs, and I'm okay to admit that. Full-time NFL coach, part-time dog walker. My motto is you're never too good to walk someone else's dog. And I think if we have that mindset, you will get to where you want to go.
I think that, we've all heard the stories of working hard, and, I think that there's certainly an element of that. But, I think I'm kind of inspired by this institute. I had the honor of being here last year. I guess that's the benefit of being a minority and a woman. You get to participate in both town halls. Last year I was speaking with Dr. Edwards, and I think I was probably complaining about something, and I find myself right now in a time of being really angry about a lot of things, or, oh my gosh, I can't even deal with this, I just need to stick my head in the sand. And for me right now, I feel like I'm going through this phase of trying to find the healthy, empowered, what can I do space. Because it feels like right now we're in such a time of, there's so much that just feels chaotic, and so finding my voice and finding the impact that I can make is important. And when I was talking with Dr. Edwards last year, was saying, I don't even remember what it was, he was like, "But yeah, Danielle, what are you gonna do?" I don't know, but what are you gonna do? You have to do something. You can't just talk about it. And so whether it's in sport, whether it's in your school, whether it's in, whatever capacity you find yourself, take action, do something. We might not be able to fix everything, but there is always something that we can do, walking a dog, taking out the garbage, whatever it might be, and doing that to the absolute best of your ability so that you end up ultimately putting more on the table than you take off.
One of the great joys of being where I am in my career is I do have a lot of young men and women who come to see me and want to talk about how I got to where I am. And I always laugh when they say, I want your job. I'm like, okay, well, there were 6 jobs before that. So let's walk through each one. That is one. So there's 2 things. One is I really believe that when you're working your way through your career, the key is not to have to have your ultimate job. Just make sure the one you go to is better for you than the one you're leaving, for whatever reason. And I can honestly say in my career, because every job I've had, I've left on my own terms, which again, I've had an amazing career. And I can say they were steps, and every one I took was for the right reason at the right time and was, better than for me to get to where I wanted to get than the one I left. So it really is a process. The other thing I've realized now, and you hear a lot about mentorship. I think that there is a distinction between mentorship and sponsorship. So let me say this. I think both are really important. I would say to any woman, man, person of color, you need to have someone sponsor you. That person does not have to look like you, okay? The people that sponsored me, I'm just gonna say, were white men. They were, other than Dr. Edwards, who again, got me here. But they were, because they were running the businesses that I wanted to work in. So they sponsored me. And then I went out and I found my kitchen cabinet, right? My mentors, which were a lot of women peers who came up in the business with me. And they're the ones that I share insecurities with and help me gain the confidence to jump into new opportunities. So again, keep in mind there's a distinction between sponsorship and mentorship. Go out, get both, embrace both, and you don't have to look in the mirror. The person looking back at you doesn't have to look just like you.
Can you repeat the question?
What advice would you give to a young person in this audience who wants to be you someday?
I think that I heard someone say in the other panel about it's awesome to be an athlete. And one thing I love about team sports is that you have to depend on each other to accomplish your goal. And I guess I got that from being from a family of 20, then also the military. It's like you depend on each other. And to me, that's such a great, you learn so much about yourself through that. before as an athlete, is understanding the process you're in. You are in a process. And I talk to athletes, okay, I want to go to Division I school. You know what? You may want to go there, but it may not happen. Like I said earlier, as long as you move and doing something, because if something doesn't challenge you, it won't make you better. And that's another quote that I love, is that we miss out on opportunities, but they come in work clothes. So I try to challenge the athletes. It's okay. Where you are is your process. You can get where you're going eventually, but you can't waste this opportunity now where you are. And I'm going to borrow one of Martin Luther King that he talked about, is that if you're a street sweeper, you mentioned something about it. To me, don't be so complaining about it. Listen, be the best street sweeper. Sweep it like Beethoven wrote music. Sweep the streets like Maya Angelou wrote poems. Sweep the streets like Michelangelo painted. Sweep the streets so into where the heavens open up, so you're the best street sweeper in the world. So I think that understanding process is the key. When I talk to athletes, hey, trust your process. You may fall flat on your face, get back up and keep moving, because resilience is going to teach you a lot. Challenge is going to keep you a lot. It didn't happen easy for me, but I love every challenge I've gone through, because there's beauty in the struggle. So really the key word is process. You're in a process. Trust it, because the sky's the limit if you just endure.
What a perfect note. I love that. There is beauty in the struggle. I think that's the perfect way for us to end not only this panel, but the program today. So thank you all so much on this panel, and thank you to everybody in the audience and everybody who came before us. Thank you.